Hello, everyone. Welcome to another RollPlay Presents a 5e Roundtable discussion. I'm JP McDaniel, the creator of RollPlay, and your host for today. We've got the same lineup of guests that we had from the first episode. So we'll just kind of go around and introduce everyone real quick. Matthew Mercer, the Critical Role GM and popular voice actor. How's it going, Mr. Mercer?
Good. Happy to be back, folks, and amongst just such fancy company. Thanks for having me.
Happy to have you here. Mr. Colville, GM and host of popular YouTube series Running the Game, and also... we're just going to call you Millionaire Matt from now. Is that okay?
So I prefer the term King of Kickstarter. Thank you.
Okay, King of Kickstarter. Yeah. Sorry, I'm so sorry, Your Excellency.
Don't call it. Don't call it.
He recently started a Kickstarter. Well, 2 days ago. It's almost at 1 million. We'll talk about that in just a bit.
Adam, we will? Uh-oh.
We're just going to mention it, yeah. Adam Koebel, GM here at RollPlay and Roll20, as well as the creator of the award-winning Dungeon World. I think that's the tagline. Okay, good.
The official name of the game is Adam Koebel's award-winning tabletop role-playing game Dungeon World, featuring Sage Latoro.
Nice.
But Dungeon World will do.
Perfect. And Mike Mearls, the co-creator of D&D 5th Edition and the franchise creative director. Are you currently at the WotC offices right now? Is that where you're located?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
It's a little quieter environment. We have a very angry toddler at home, so...
I mean, I feel like you probably get some angry toddlers at Wizards, too.
Uh-oh.
Oh, we don't talk about that.
Uh-oh. Jesus, shots fired already. Before we get started here, though, I do want to visit with each of you for a quick second. Mr. Mercer, congrats on Campaign 2. Is that the official name that you guys are calling it?
Thank you for now, I guess, until they decide what their party name is, I suppose.
That makes sense. I've been following you guys on Twitter for a while, and the weirdest thing I've seen, and I think the weirdest thing for you guys, is all these billboards popping up across LA with your name and Critical Role and all on it.
That is so fucking cool. God, that makes me so proud of you guys.
Thing. We finally, this morning, me and Mercer finally went and saw them in person because we hadn't been able to do it yet. And as a person who grew up as an actor coming to LA with, bright eyes, like one day it'd be great to be on one of these billboards. I would never have expected it would be for D&D and in that outfit. So
nice. That's right.
It's been a very wonderful, surreal experience.
Yeah, if you guys haven't seen any of that, go check out Matt's Twitter. I think today you posted a photo of it so you can kind of see the billboards. It's kind of crazy to see that stuff.
Weird. It's weird.
There's a whole bunch of actors in LA right now going, wait, what?
Yeah. What is this Twitch thing? Where's my agent? I need him right now. We got to get on top of this.
One of them's right off Pico, right next to Sony Pictures and Fox, and I'm just like, I want all those executives to drive down there every day to work, going, what the fuck?
I guarantee you, some of them are trying to figure it out and going, we gotta have one of them.
I think it's more like, nah.
What's this Twitch thing? Has it happened yet where someone's tuned into the show that you know of and been like, hey, I saw the billboard. What is this thing about? Have you had that conversation yet?
We've had people who were like peripherally or really unaware of Critical Role and like the entertainment industry that we were working on games or other projects said, so I saw you on a billboard. What is this for? And then have the great conversation of like, oh, well, it's not a television show or a movie or a series. It's our Dungeons and Dragons game. And that brief pause.
Television.
Yeah, well, you can, yeah. There's that awkward pause after them going,
did he say what I think he just said?
Yeah. Yeah, it's got to be a head spinner for sure. But congrats on, like we said, all the success. King of Kickstarter, as he deemed himself, Mr. Matt Koebel.
I'm going to regret saying that.
No, it's all show long, yeah. Congrats on the Kickstarter, dude. You're 2 days in and what, like 850,000, I think is what... Sorry, 830, 829 to be exact.
This is going to sound like false hubris, but I don't keep track of the number. People shouted at me, but I don't go to the page. I focused on getting the everything ready to make the book. So.
Listen, JP, you think Scrooge McDuck knows how many gold coins are in his mighty vault? No.
It's crazy. It's a lot of people are talking. I see a lot of conversation online about what this means for the industry, but really, I don't know. I'm not an expert on this yet, but I feel like what you're seeing has a lot more to do with YouTube than it does with anything else, than it does with D&D, certainly than it does with strongholds and followers. It has a lot more to do with YouTube and building a community online, building a community on the internet, and using YouTube as a platform to do that. I think our YouTube channel is fantastic, by which I mean the community. Like, the comments are great. It's not what you expect from YouTube, and I think this is the result of that.
Yeah. For those that don't know, go to Kickstarter and just search Strongholds and Streaming, and you'll find it there. It's also being linked in chat if people are checking it out. But yeah.
Please give to it. We want to make sure we hit that awesome Kender stretch goal so we can get those back in the game.
That is not happening.
Get out. Just get the fuck out of here, man.
I'm dumb, but I'm not insane.
I mean, that's another 60,000 right there in like a second.
Yeah,
just
see, there you go.
because
Boom.
Mercer's word. Yeah, he knows advertising. He's got billboards. This man has a billboard.
It's
He
true,
knows
he
what he's
does.
doing.
Right. Listen to the talking billboard. He knows what's up. That's
The
fine.
billboard told me what to do.
See, now the responsibility is there for me to come forward and say, no, please, no Kender, never Kender.
So, Koebel, are you just waking up the past 2 mornings just being like, what the fuck is my life? Like, what is this weird thing
Waking
that is...
up.
Yeah. Oh, you haven't even slept? Okay.
I slept like a rock the night of the Kickstarter, Xanax. But apart from that, it's been mostly just, trying to keep up with engaging with the community. I've seen other Kickstarters succeed and then sort of falter. I won't say fail, but falter because they had no plan for engagement. And so just constantly being on Reddit, on the Discord, on the Kickstarter page, engaging with people, answering their questions, making sure they're being heard and we have answers. And I'm incredibly lucky that I've got a team of producers. I take back every bad thing I ever said about producers because having people who are just like, I just love making lists. Like, so here's 300 entries of the most popular questions people have asked, and we need to come up with answers for.
Yeah.
Is it's going to be make a huge boon. So that's what I think about right now. That's where my mind is.
Gotcha. Well, good luck with the continued success, I'm sure, of the
Thank you.
Kickstarter, and we're all eagerly awaiting to see the book. I'm sure that's going to be just the most stressful situation when that ends, and you're like, God, we got to do this now. We actually have to do work.
I just really don't want to have. Well, I mean, a lot of the rules are already written, by the way, so it's just
okay,
going to be
nice,
up to the playtesters to hopefully we get a good team of playtesters and get good feedback, and we're able to produce a book that the people who backed it like. That's the goal. Don't want to let those people down.
Awesome stuff. Mr. Adam Koebel.
It's me.
Adam, I think you GM a game every single day now. Are you 7 days a week? Is that where you're at?
I mean, if somebody didn't make me play D&D 3 out of 8 days,
That's right.
I'd probably
We've got
have
16
more room
hours
for
in the
things.
next 8 days. Are you ready?
I play a lot of role-playing games on the internet. It's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
By the way, I now am in a position, if Adam were interested, at some point in the future, fly him down and we play the Dune board game live on a screen and talk about it. You're not under any obligation. I'm putting you on the spot right here, but gosh, Adam, that would be a lot of fun.
Yes. So for folks who maybe don't know, the first thing that the King of Kickstarter and I bonded over was Yon Ancient Dune board game, which is both of our favorite game board game wise.
Favorite.
So yeah, I love it, and I will take any excuse to play it. I would love to. It'd be awesome.
That's gonna happen.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, we'll all be looking forward to that for sure. I can't wait to see Adam and Colville opposite ends of a board just pissed off at each other. It'll just be like any other day. Just be any other day. Last but not least, Mr. Mike Mearls. We're here to talk D&D, but I want to talk to you. You watch the Overwatch League. We actually have exchanged tweets about the Overwatch League, and I did not expect that at all for whatever reason.
Oh. Yeah, no, it's been great. And, I'm a little like, I missed yesterday.
Yes.
I was busy all day. But, man, there was like, I know the results, but it's still fun to watch the matches. It is, I'm horrible at Overwatch. I'm terrible. But I really like playing it.
Yeah.
And it's fun to watch people play it well. And it's really interesting to me how the game, for me, whatever reason, it really maps very well to like a sport. It's dramatic, It's just the swell of the music as the payload approaches the end and all that stuff. Like it's just and especially when you have a close match and it goes to overtime like that, to me it feels like overtime hockey. Like it's amazing.
Yeah, they yesterday was it was like 13 hours yesterday straight. I think. The team that ended up winning played 14 matches over 11 hours or something.
Yeah, because I think because they had to play. They had like a regular season match, then they had to play the intro match, and then they had to play the championship match.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you couldn't. What I loved about that was you couldn't do that in non-esports, right? You couldn't ask someone like play 3 soccer games in a day, like that'd be crazy.
Yeah,
like people would literally
work.
get like horribly injured, right?
Right.
But it's kind of nifty to play with that, And I'm sure it took a toll on the guys playing, but But yeah, I missed it. I was like, I was so like, and I'm a big Boston fan because I'm a Boston sports guy. And the Uprising, I really like that's the thing is it's also been a good storyline watching the Uprising start out. No one gave us a chance preseason, right? Who are these guys? Nobody knows. And then you can kind of see the team start to gel, and that win over the Spitfire, and then everything since then has just been and like so close to taking down Houston yesterday. It was such But yeah, so I'm really enjoying it.
It sounds like he's talking about a real sport.
It is a real sport. I would say, I would 100%, I would fight you to say that playing Overwatch, esports are real sports. Like, if you're to look, other than, like, it is, because when you're watching someone, like, play, and you realize a lot of it, I've always been a really big sports fan. And I think that there is definitely a genius to knowing, when you think about someone like Michael Jordan, when he's bouncing a ball and moving at full speed and jumping in the air and making midair adjustments, like, that is genius. Like, absolutely. Right? That's absolutely, and
Ted Williams was a genius.
Yeah,
exactly.
Was
a legit genius. Yeah.
So yeah, I've been, and it's actually, it works out well, because usually later on in the days when I have desk time at work, so I can fire up a web browser and watch Twitch while I'm finishing stuff up. So
nice. Well, we all are eagerly looking forward to your Overwatch podcast, talking about the Overwatch near future. Yeah. So let's talk D&D. One of the major components for really the second episode was actually a Twitter conversation between yourself, Mike, and Adam. And the conversation was primarily about talking about tabletop RPG streams and how if the cast is miserable because of the in-game actions, whether it's player death or bad rolls or anything like that, the audience is most likely loving that, because it's kind of, everyone celebrates the misery of the players in this world of streaming. But there's also the opposite, where if the players are just absolutely demolishing the encounter or getting through the puzzles, whatever, with ease, the audience might be kind of bored. So the primary focus of this roundtable will kind of discuss and focus on the idea of streaming games of D&D, and not the technical aspects. If you want to know how to set up XSplit, don't watch this. We're not going to go through overlays, stuff like that. But really, the future of D&D in this weird world of streaming tabletop games and future aspects of that and different aspects of that. So to start off with, let's talk about PC death and kind of the tabletop narrative and how that works in the world of streaming. I think one of the most captivating aspects of D&D in general is this idea that death means something, and it's not, you don't just press X to restart. Like, if you die in D&D, save for a Resurrect spell or whatever, you're dead. You got to start over again.
Right. If you die in Dungeons and Dragons, you die in real life.
It's true. Yeah,
100%. Blackleaf has taught us this.
Yeah.
Jack Chick laid it out. We know how it goes.
Yeah.
So don't.
That dude was hardcore. He was a hardcore DM, right?
He knew what was up.
Exactly. Yeah. So, Mike, I want to start with you, and how do you, and maybe by extension, Wizard of the Coast, how do you envision player death to be handled at the table?
Well, it's not something that we design-wise put a ton of thought into, I'll be honest. Like, because it is one of those things that's very cultural, and as far as like at the table, whatever table you're playing, because it was when you look over the history of the game, very early on in the 70s when D&D started, there was this very strong sense that like winning Dungeons and Dragons was gaining levels. Right. And losing was dying, right? Like, if you played in a campaign and you had a 5th level fighter, that meant something. That meant I am good at this game, right? Like, and it was a game that was very binary in a lot of its results, right? If you failed the saving throw, you died, right? If you got dropped to 0 hit points, you were dead. And so it has transformed, especially in the 80s, from this marker of success and play skill. Because very much the game was, the play skill of D&D was like, I know to look under the bed for a chest, a treasure chest. I know when I open the chest,
We had a moment like that recently in a 5e game where one of the players had played through Caves of Chaos. They'd played through Keeping the Borderlands, and one of the other players hadn't. And the player who hadn't was searching through some tents. We were playing Tomb of Annihilation, searching through some tents, and they were like, what, is there just like going to be a cobra in here that's going to jump out and bite me? And the player who had played it was like, ugh, and I was like, okay, a cobra jumps out and bites you in the
Why did you say that?
Yeah, and that's exactly the thing. Is
that exact same thing happened?
It's a player skill.
Yeah, that happened in my game where they were in the swamp and someone fell off the thing into the swamp, and one of the players said, oh, I hope there aren't leeches in there. And I was like, leeches? And the other player's like, you idiot.
Of course there are. Yeah. Yeah, but that's a paradigm shift, like you said.
Yeah, no, and it's something that's really evolved. And as the game went in the 80s and 90s, and this idea of, rather than it being this almost very, it's a cliche, but it's the wargaming roots versus this more storytelling direction the game went. Yeah. That death became like, I know, right, in my own campaigns, I try not to kill players because it's a pain in the ass, right?
I also try not to kill players.
I'll kill characters. If you kill a player, that's a whole other.
It's probably easier to kill. I'm more tempted to kill a player than a character. But
jeez.
But
I love the characters, players I can take or leave.
I'm hardcore. What can I say? But when you're building a world and you have these characters with backstories and everything's tied together, and then a character dies, and now you have to work the new character in, and it's just, you're losing a lot of that sort of narrative coherence and the narrative weight you built, right? It used to be, oh, you died, that means you suck, so go back to first level, haha. And now it's like, well, why would your new character, like, hey, your character's first level and we're 10th level. Why the hell would we take you into the dragon domain, right? That doesn't make any sense. Or we have to figure it out, right? And so there's a very natural tendency, we'll make a 10th level character, right? You can see that idea of level as skill marker having almost been completely erased from how most people play the game. One of the most frequently asked questions we get is, how do I make a character above first level?
Well, so that's the thing that I wonder about that, though, is that the skill now seems to have been replaced in a lot of games with, like, you dying is not the indicator of failure, but ending up at 20th level with a suboptimal character feels like more the like, well, why did you take this ability or why did you take that level? Like, there's no synergy between your abilities. Like, I think there is still that player skill, but it's shifted into building the character rather than the play. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely true if you think in terms of like skill with the system. But I think in a lot of ways now, when people think of player skill, it's almost more the soft skills. Like, are you a fun person to play with? Like, if you're playing the character who's impulsive and greedy, will you steal the crown jewels when you have the chance, even though you know it's going to cause a lot of trouble, because that's more fun, right? For whatever the group's definition of fun is. But I think that kind of carries over a little bit to streaming too, where that's a little more fun to watch. And I think that's just kind of a little bit of a convergence that's happened. That the Dungeons and Dragons of 15 years ago may not have been very fun at all to stream, because it would have been a lot of counting squares and figuring out your optimal power attack. And I got this bonus from the Bard, and then the Druid did this to me, and now I've got this bonus, so I'm plus
That's why when we started streaming Critical Role, we've been playing in Pathfinder for years, because 3.5 in Pathfinder was what I knew and I was comfortable in. And then when 5th edition had come out and kind of the feedback had come in from the community that it was much more streamlined when it came to, involving storytelling into the actual mechanics, and the combat wasn't quite as reliant on floating, modifiers from so many sources. That was an easy choice for us for that reason, because whenever we were at home games and we had to decide all the different variable bonuses from different sources in a given point in time, it got to the point where the players started checking out of the actual action.
And they're the players. Imagine
they're the players.
I didn't know that, Matt. That's super interesting. Yeah.
I wonder about that, because I don't feel like 5e is more about those soft skills or like good role playing than Pathfinder was. Like, I think that's a lateral change, right? The mechanics dropped away in terms of complexity, but I don't think there's anything in 5e that rewards or encourages that, like, be fun to play with in a way that previous editions of D&D didn't.
It doesn't mechanically. So, like, a lot of the mechanical shift was 100% to make the game more accessible. I mean, that's the entire story of 5th edition was, we need to start the player acquisition engine. It's how you think of it, right? We hadn't really had new people coming in appreciable numbers since the 90s to D&D.
Yeah. And
so it's just luck, which I'll take, right? Hey, I'll take luck, right? If life wants to give me a lucky choice, I'll take it. But I think in some ways it's going to be interesting to think of the future of D&D, because at the time when we designed the rules, we did have a sense of the community we wanted to build. And we did have a sense of the tone we wanted it to have, but we never felt we had enough tactical control over the game, and we never really felt that we understood the audience well enough to be that prescribed in, here's really mapped out how we want you to act, because we just didn't really have a clear sense of it. Well, sorry, go ahead.
Well, is that something, kind of on the topic of player death or player character death, before Adam hounds me again with that? Are we at a point kind of in the future of 5e where you'll have a footnote or a side rule or something like that for, like, here's how you could deal with death if you're planning on streaming this? Is that something that you can envision in the rules in the future?
Yeah, no, I definitely could, because I think now, thanks to streaming and thanks to having a much bigger, a really big active community, we can start talking about these more meta topics with a bit more confidence, rather than just feeling like we just don't know what we're saying, right? We could be giving, and especially when you're undergoing so much change in the game, we didn't want to start delving into that more meta discussion and how to set rewards and stuff. Yeah. We kind of had this like D&D has existed for 40 years. So we just kind of, streamline the game to get more people to start playing. Then we'll worry about being more tactical about things. But yeah, like a lot of the stuff Adam talked about, like D&D doesn't really go out of its way. I mean, the one thing I have noticed is just with backgrounds, just by including these tables and including like, hey, write this down on your character sheet. It's almost like that was just a reminder people needed. And I think that has helped new players a lot be
100%.
A bit more like specific about their character beyond just saying like lawful neutral. So that's
it's
one
brilliant
thing
design because you guys made it so it's a chart, right? So that you can just choose something, but there's also that oracular, like, I'm just going to cast the bones and see what is my character's, and that inspires people. And it is a huge, I've introduced 30 players to the game at work, and it makes them think about their character in a way they never would have before, and they like it. It's fun. It gets them thinking about stuff they wouldn't have thought of before.
We have a character in the past of Court of Swords. Folks might remember Persnigatron Torbisher, Day 9's character. He made a character who died like in the first combat. Koebel hit him with a scorching ray, died instantly. Second round of combat, he was like, well, I guess my guy died. I got to make a new guy. But instead of making the character on purpose, he just said, okay, I'm just going to roll randomly for everything. Like every possible thing. I'll roll my race, my class, everything.
That's cool. I like that guy.
Yeah, and the character was really interesting because of it. And he was suboptimal in a bunch of ways, but his buy-in was different, right? Sean was a guest. He knew he only had 6 sessions he needed to play this character. So if the character came out really poor, that freedom to just randomly roll, I think, was present. But I don't know that people would feel as comfortable in a game like D&D doing that de facto at the beginning if that was your setup. There are games, obviously, that are built on that. You don't get to make any choices around character creation. But I think there is a certain, like you said, there's a certain oracular excitement about being like, why is this character like this? Like, I rolled totally incongruous stuff. Now it's my job to figure that out. And I think GMs know that. You have to do that all the time. Like, why are there 4 halfling merchants on the 17th level of this dungeon? I don't know, but the table said they're here, so now I got to justify it. So.
Yeah.
Well, I think a large part of what dungeon mastering or game mastering at all is just justification. It's you trying to find out what the rules present before you, the choices the players make, and the unexpected scenarios, and you just have to kind of formulate how to weave these together. And so as long as you're comfortable in that space, and even if you aren't, it's a good exercise to take some of those random elements every now and then and see how best you can adjust that and incorporate it into the story. And it may not be the most optimal thing, and it may make for a funny story in the long run, but I think that makes you a stronger GM the more you practice, allowing those unexpected elements in and trying to weave it in.
So do you think, I was just going to ask, I'm curious about Mike's, because you were talking about the random tables. Do you think, going back to JP's original point about character death, do you think like the tables, the background tables, the more detailed ones in like, say, Xanathar's, do you think that takes away some of the pressure of character death? Like if your character dies, a faster path to creating a new character that actually has some interesting background that you can play, do you think that reduces some of that drag?
Yeah, I think it does. And I think also one of the things that when you think of it just in terms of game design is making death more interesting, and how do you get DMs to embrace that? Where because the thing is, in a game, in most games, you die, the game ends, right? If I'm playing a roguelike, I die, I start over. But in a group cooperative game, it's a little strange to be like, okay, so you're knocked out, right? Like, what do you? So I think tables like that, and like one of the things I've been kind of thinking about was, could you, in our published adventures, do something along those lines? Like, here's tables you can roll on to make the character who's joining the campaign halfway through. Like, especially with the published game, right? You can say which chapter are you in, then add this die roll to your array, right? So you have to maybe it's a bit more,
Tomb does that a little, right? There's a section where once you reach the final dungeon, it's a kind of go, no-go situation. But if someone dies, here are 10 excuses to put a new character in the party.
Yeah.
I think, and a point too to kind of help, because character death is not only is it part of the underlying tension that helps the players understand their choices have consequences, and that this is a real challenge you're trying to go through, even though you're not trying to kill your players' characters necessarily all the time. You need to have that real threat for a lot of games, for a lot of groups to feel like it's a thrilling experience. I've had previous campaigns where players have died, and what's helped me Especially if it's not a really epic death. If it's cool if the player is in a huge boss fight against a major villain they've been trying, and the villain gets to finish them off, and that was a good death. But if it's like Koebel number 3,
well, let me tell you about yesterday when I had a bag of devouring jump on me and I almost died. I literally just almost died in the middle of
that sounds memorable.
Yeah. So moments like that. If you play just by the rules, you go to 0 hit points. Death saving throws, you're dead. Game over for your character. I've enjoyed, even where it wouldn't make sense in the moment, allowing those players to play out a lengthy death, whether even if they would have been smashed, maybe when the battle's over, they go back to his body and, his upper form, like Bishop in Aliens, is still there on the ground conscious as he's bleeding out. And you give him a minute to say goodbye or tell him what his final wish is. This is a secret I held and I could never complete it. Do it for me. Go forward, and kind of drive that memory. I find as long as you give players the opportunity to make the death meaningful, even in a situation where it might not be, it lets them put it to bed a little stronger and not feel like they got taken away from them unfairly. Death is such a weird, sticky thing.
There's kind of a fine line, right? Because for when you're streaming a game, you don't want the audience to start claiming plot armor, right? That's the last thing you want, because you want to make sure, like you said, the most important thing is death. They want to have this fear of dying. But the second that people start saying oh man, he's got plot armor, there's no way this guy's ever going to die, ever, just because of what just happened. So, and then on the other side, you don't want to make it too challenging where you have a death every other show, because then that sucks for both the players, and sometimes the audience is into that for a death or two. But the second they have to, or the third or fourth time they have to learn a new character, it's kind of just oh god, here we go again. You walk into
and they're engaged with the old character,
right? Exactly.
They're engaged with that character often in a very intense way, and you kill them off, and now what have you done to your audience?
Yeah, Colville, you kind of surprised me when you said that you don't like killing players at a table. I expected you to be the guy who's yeah, you fucking died. Get out of here. Get off my table. So what? You're not a fan of death at the table. What, you want to expand on that a little bit? In terms of why, perhaps?
Wait, me or Adam?
You.
This is you. JP. Yeah, I'm Adam. You're Koebel. If you called me Koebel, then I would be very confused. Yeah, but that's okay. This is all you, buddy.
Yeah, we're going last name. Sorry about that.
Did I say that? What did I say? I said I'm not a fan of killing what?
You're not a fan of killing players.
I think it was a joke from earlier.
Was that an actual joke? Man, you're so deadpan. I didn't even pick up.
That's what I've learned, is that jokes are funny.
Okay.
And if the people don't laugh, then no, it wasn't a joke.
Okay.
No, I have no problem killing off characters. In fact, one of my best friends and now my dungeon master and my boss, who probably was thinking about firing me, I killed off his character in the middle of a recent game, and it was awful. I if it's there's good death and there's bad death, right? There's death where everybody at the table understands that had to happen, right? That's what that character would do, and often it's best when it's the player's decision, right? You rub the lamp and the genie comes out and the demon says, if you don't do this, then I do that, and the player says, I do not bargain, and the player knows in that moment that he's going to die. Yeah. And it feels like this is what should have happened. This is right. I remember my friend Jim Murphy, we're talking about character death. Talking about character death in the old game. I liked Mike's comments. My friend Jim talked about how they would often argue, and I vaguely remember this, argue about how many deaths was the right number of deaths for a given campaign for a given character. By the time you're 5th level, how many times should your characters have died? Because otherwise it was too easy. Otherwise the game wasn't realistic. And I actually have been taking notes. And I think a lot of player death is about expectation. Like if you as a dungeon master have told your players ahead of time, listen, you need to make 2 characters because life is cheap in this world, then that vastly recolors their attitude toward the game and their character. Totally. And they're still going to hate it when their character dies, but they've got this, they're already got, but that's right. I remember Sam, when Scanlan, I get the names and the characters confused now because of the stupid comic. When Scanlan almost died, and actually I think he was dead, and somebody brought him back, and he, as an aside, he said, "Oh, but I was looking forward to my new guy. I already had an idea." Right. So that's real. That happens. And I think if there were mechanics for heroic death, where the player was like, crap, things didn't go my way, and now I'm going to die, and that sucks, and you have all that that grieving for this character. But if there were a mechanic for, well, I'm a paladin or I'm an elf or this is my background and I get this way to die that is heroic and epic, and it's like the retributive strike, from the old.
That's actually really cool idea. The idea of your character's going to die, but you get one a benefit, one final way to help your friends as your exit that can ensure or help them.
Mike, I think anybody in this chat could do it, and probably most of the people watching. But if you give Mike 30 minutes, he could come up with,
so that's what's fascinating. That's what's fascinating about this whole conversation, right? Like the thing is that we're all having to do this work because D&D doesn't care. Like the system is like, I don't know, you die.
Yeah, well, because like Mike said, death is and how the players deal with it is, I think, a very idiosyncratic thing. I'm not necessarily sure I would want. We don't know. We haven't seen it. I'm not sure I would want a philosophy regarding life and death.
Because I think
because I do feel like that should be
the thing. Yeah, that's the thing. Is you have the mechanics of D&D, and you have the setting, by which I mean not just the literal place your game is set, but like the tone and the feel of that. And you almost have to use that as a filter for the mechanics to get to the play of the game. And it doesn't translate one-to-one, right? The game will, as it passes through that screen, it'll change. Yep. And you get to a place where you're like, okay, cool. So death by default is this very neutral one-note thing, but because I want the game to feel particularly gritty, then we'll do it this way. Or I want it to feel more heroic, then it ends up this way. And I think it's okay. Like saying D&D doesn't care about it doesn't mean that it should. It just means that we have to do that work as game masters and as players.
I think also there's I think we all understand this, but we haven't talked about it. There's a lot of ways for a team or a character player to fail that doesn't have anything to do with death. And I think there's this built-in assumption that death is the price of failure. Right. And it is a difficult thing to deal with at the table because of the engagement of the player, if we're talking about streaming, and the audience, but they're pretty similar. Oh, my character's dead. Now this is a problem to solve. I killed, but it's not really a problem to solve when you're talking about we failed to save the princess. We failed to restore the heir to the throne, especially if these are characters. I think we're human beings. We're monkeys. We like looking and thinking about other monkeys. If it's a character in the game that you've engaged with, and now something bad happens to that character, the players will feel like they failed.
Oh, yeah. Totally.
Also, this is getting back to something Mike said before. I apologize for going on. But like back in the day, there was save or die. I had a character, like the bag of devouring. Back in the day, there was, I put on this necklace that I thought was a necklace of fireballs. I don't even think I got a saving throw. I don't even think I got to make a save. My character just died. Because here's the thing.
The mistake was that you put it on in the first place.
Correct.
Exactly.
Correct. The mistake was that we didn't wait till the next day when we had identify. But my point is, save or die, which is now considered a terrible mechanic because it is. There was a reason for it, though. And the reason was it was fun as hell.
Oh yeah.
For everyone else.
Oh yeah.
For everyone else at the table. So, it sucked for you and you hated it, but everyone else has this schadenfreude where they're like, let's see what happens. So that notion of like the group having fun in aggregate, even though you're down here, but everyone else is up. That is to me, that's I don't like that design, but it is very interesting.
It speaks to JP's original point about how a player can be, or a group can be miserable, but if your goal is to make a good show, you can sometimes end up fulfilling that goal and have the players all be like, I am not having fun, but the audience is super engaged because I've had this happen where, because we're doing this in this sort of 7 seconds off from live environment where a player will be discussing a terrible idea. A player will be like, we should do this thing. And the players are all talking about it. And I will look at my camera and I would be like, God help me, chat. Like they're going to do it. And this is not my fault. When this happens, this is not on me. And then they do the bad thing and they all die. And I'm like, that wasn't me. That was them. They did this. Yeah. And chat can buy into that. But I think it's that fleeting high, right? Where people are like, yeah, TPK, that was,
It's fun in the moment. Dead. It sucks 5 minutes afterwards. Yeah. Mearls,
it's also interesting that we're talking about, you just said it. There's the player. Are they having fun? That can be yes or no.
Yeah.
And then there's the group. Are they engaged in having fun? And that can be yes, while this is no. That was why I was talking about. And then there's the audience now for some of us. And there will be people in chat who are like, there shouldn't be an audience. I get that. And God forbid I ever get to a point in my life where I'm making decisions about the audience over the players. That's crazy. But I definitely think there are mechanics and ways you can improve the game, the play of the game for the players that would also really improve it for the viewers.
Yeah. And that's kind of where I've been thinking about death. And when we had that discussion, I've been thinking about it in the back of my head. And I think when we talk about save or die, we really see the transformation that's gone on. The game has gone from being something that was very tactical. What you did in the course of the session was really important. And what you did from session on session was just simply lengthening that tactical game. You might have long-term goals like building a stronghold. Hey, like what you're covering now, right? Go head over to Kickstarter to back, right?
Kickstarter.com/stronghold. Sorry, the king of Kickstarter. Just money's under.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of money spent. Yeah, go ahead.
But
Anyway.
Hail to the king, right? But I think what the big transformation in the 80s and onward was the games becoming more strategic. Strategic in the sense of my character is the wrongly accused murderer of the king, and I will one day prove my innocence. But that's going to be like after like 30 sessions. Because if it's after one session, then you're like, oh no, people want that big payoff. And death kind of hasn't changed, right? A lot of other things with the game have shifted. But the idea of your character dying hasn't really changed much at all. It's still very much a tactical element. And I think that's when you see people get very disappointed, is when you have a very tactical death. You failed that saving throw. The ogre crits you, and then you couldn't roll above a 10, so now you're dead. Whereas when you think of death in storytelling, I remember watching Robotech back in the 80s. And if you remember Ben.
Oh my God, I know
Ben,
exactly what you're going to say.
Right? And when Ben.
100%. Roy Fokker, oh my God.
Yeah. No, and it wasn't just. I remember when I think it was Roy or Ben when they're eating they're about to eat a steak, and it's like, oh, scramble, go off to fight. And he goes running, and then the camera, the animation zooms in on the steak. And you're like, no, he's going to die. I know it. Right?
Yeah.
And then
No,
he did,
100%.
right?
Yeah. My moment was when Roy Fokker died in Robotech, and you're like, what? Yeah, that was my Game of Thrones. Yeah.
So
sorry.
Was it Ben, the guy eating the steak? I think, yeah.
I don't remember. I remember he was one of Rick's buddies. They're like the three.
Yeah.
They were like the Three Musketeers, and yeah, that guy didn't make it.
Not to interrupt the giant robot circle jerk, but
giant robot soap opera.
I mean, maybe the thing to think about is that we don't have like success on one end of the scale and death on the other, because I definitely feel like there have been times, especially in streaming, where a character dying feels like a narrative success. It's like I died killing my arch nemesis, so instead you have like misery and success, right? Where like failure is just your character suffers has to deal with bad shit.
No, the stake is getting us there. Like I think, like this is like when you think about it, that was satisfying because it said, now I as a viewer knew someone was going to die. That was part of the narrative, right? It wasn't about success or failure. It was just about this character's arc. And I think that's where I think actually pulling death. I mean, you could still put death on the success failure line, but I think defaulting to that is a mistake. And I think if you can find ways to make death more strategic, where you can have that moment. So I'll just give you a very brute force mechanic, you could say. In D&D 5e, you could say the rule is once you fail a number of death saves equal to half your con score, whatever, you die. And that's across the entire career of your character. And you can't change that number ever. So now suddenly you have the Ben walking away from his stake moment, right? Like, I only have one more failed death save to go. And that's when the players know we're about to fight like the 8-headed dragon of
Bro, you just invented hardcore mode for D&D.
Yeah.
You just invented Diablo hardcore mode.
Yeah.
But that gives you that moment, right, where my character has one more
this
failure.
Is it. I'm walking off to die. Yeah.
I'm going off to die. Right. And now it's strategic. Now both death and the storytelling are strategic.
Okay, so
we've kind of maybe worked on aligning those two things.
Right. No, I 100% agree, but I think there's a way to make it more like when I was pitching the idea of your character having kind of a built-in retributive strike, like, right, I'm dying, this is it. But now I get to use this super cool ability. I was imagining it as like a booby prize, right? It's like, well, sorry, you died, but at least there's this memorable thing happens. But of course, as soon as a player sees, I have this unique resource I can only use when I die. What happens, right? They say, no, I will stand on the bridge and I will hold the way. You guys go, you run. Yeah. Because I know I will get to use my cool, awesome ability. And now this isn't a booby prize anymore. Now this is a deeply narrative thing happening, right? It's your character's final stand and you were in charge of it and you took control of it. It was a proactive, pro-agency. I love that. Anyway, you get the idea.
That's why you played D&D right there, yeah.
Well, the trick with a situation like that and trying to forecast dramatic death, though, is that you have one death save left. You leave that stake on the table. You walk outside. You step in the pit trap. A spike goes through your head, and you died. Your arch nemesis on the other side of the trap, being like, "Really, man? I'm right over here, and you're in the pit trap." Yeah. Like, good job.
I tell that story
a little bit.
Years.
I tell you, I used to work. I worked on. I was the lead writer on a game that I'm deeply proud of called Evolve, and it was originally one monster. It was one monster versus 4 heroes, but the way it was pitched to me was, and the planet is tough enough that it can win. The wildlife is so, and it turned out that if you were running through the jungle and you got ambushed by the wildlife and you died, the monster player would see you win, and no one was happy.
Right.
Because
the
pit trap killed the party.
Yeah.
Right. And they're like, wait, what? And not even the dungeon master's not like, I was looking forward to busting out Calorol the Vile. Where the pit trap? What? Right. So that you got to think about that as a dungeon master. Are you okay with the idea that this Koebel that you put in the game, they might kill might kill this character?
Yeah. I want to bring Mercer into it. Well, go ahead. And then I have a question for you. By all means.
Okay,
continue.
great. I was going to say in the same degree too, and we touched on it a little bit last discussion, but at a certain point, Magic makes death difficult to stick by the rules, and it makes it a very binary experience by the way the rules are written. To once you get access to Resurrection, whether it be a player character or even just having areas in the world where that's available, it gets to the point where death is a minor convenience, which is great for a lot of people that, they don't want heavy death in their game and want it to be just to slow you down type thing.
Well, and it feels like progress.
Yeah. But also from a streaming standpoint, when the audiences are looking for that type of drama and the players are wanting to adhere to the possibility, it can become a challenge. And so even with Critical Role, when we started streaming it, we had already gotten to a level where that was a possibility. And there have been countless complaints about claims of plot armor, that it's not hard enough. And I get it, that's fine. I'm doing my best to make a good story. And it is a very real possibility. There is no protection to the players. We actually implemented a system for Resurrection to try and still build a possibility of failure upon a successful
the skill challenge thing you guys did.
But even that wasn't enough for the audience. So you have to keep in mind to a certain degree too, that as long as the players are engaged with the death and there is the possibility within the group's belief system, that may still convey itself. But I think there should be discussion about ways to make higher level D&D, still have a lasting sting after death, which is why this thing that you were talking about earlier with a finite level of death saves you can take before you go is a really cool possibility, or variations to that. But also degrees of failure beyond death, I think, is a big way to implement that. And that's kind of what we've done with our campaign, and is to make sure that whenever a failure occurs, or even if a character comes back from the dead, the narrative experience is so visceral that it changes the way they look at the world and how they interact with things. So there are lasting consequences to their story based on that. Even though they still lived, there is an effect that it's had on their experience. But for players that haven't had a lot of experience with the game, or, look to the rules to show them how to implement that, I can see it being a very, very hard thing. And a lot of questions I see come from the community are like, how do I, at the higher levels, make death meaningful when it's so easy to avoid?
Yeah, I think it would be trivially easy for somebody like you in your game to say, okay, Resurrection, you're a 9th level cleric now, or whatever, and you can resurrect people, but there's a price. Your character comes back different, right? And there could be a chart that you have to roll on. I remember back in the day, you lost a point of constitution. You used to lose a point of constitution every time you came back. And even that, which is so what? It's so just a number on a character sheet. What does it mean? It's not a zero narrative notion. Well, not zero, but you know what I mean? Like, it was still this thing that had been marked off, and you were like, right? There was this notion of this ticking clock as you lost unrepairable constitution. But there's also the notion that if Resurrection is there, but the price could be, I'm a different person now, or the price could be, my God requires me to go on a quest, right? That's the price. And that can be a deeply narrative thing.
Yeah, I mean, without spoiling anything, there are new things in place for the new campaign to make things a little more intense.
I can't wait. I can't wait to steal them.
I can't wait
for you to play test them for me, and then I steal them.
I guess that's the thing is, like, I want this from the Dungeon Master's Guide. I want this from, like, printed material in the game to be like, you don't have to watch 17 different Twitch DMs to learn that you can make your own variations of this stuff. Like, I would love to see more aggressive advice about like Moldvay D&D did this, where it was like, here is a basic framework for if you want to make up your own rules. Everything has a 1 in 6 chance of succeeding, right? Spiral out from there. I think that there's just so much anecdotal GMing stuff that happens that I feel like disservices the people who are just like, I went into a store, I picked up the game, and now I'm playing it. I want the books to say that. I want it to say, like, here are some different ways you can do it. Here are some frameworks for building your own rules. I mean, something you said, Mike, on I was saying I was watching that talk you were doing with Bart Carroll. Something you said was that your idea of what a game designer is very, very low, right? Like, there's the bar for entry to game design is very low. And I want I want to see more of that in the mechanics. I want the game to create new game designers more readily, because I feel like it's weird that we keep having to give people permission to like make up their own shit for D&D, which seems insane to me.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, looking back at fifth, we were always worried about getting too meta, like I said earlier, because we didn't know. There is a weird sweet spot, right? It's not like the first thing you want to learn, because generally, if one of the worst things you can tell of someone who's learning something is, like, okay, so you do this, now you can do whatever you want, right? Because they don't know the universe yet. But we are looking at, like what would that look like? With the audience of D&D growing so large, it's significantly larger than it's been since at least like the late 80s. Is there now more room for like the trade paperback book just on how to be a good DM, or here's just a guide to the mechanics? It's the annotated thing. I have I have a show on Tuesdays at 1 Pacific, little plug, but where I've been designing subclasses, right, showing people. Okay, here is, I'm going to make a subclass for the Warlock. So I'm going to walk you through the Warlock class. Here's how the pieces fit together. Here's how a subclass, okay, now that I have the core class, here's where the subclass fits in. Now I'll go through and build it out. And that's very specifically so we can start capturing some of that advice, both for the community and then for us as we think, is this something that should be a product? Should this be in an expansion at some point? We just did Xanathars, like what's the sequel to Xanathars? Is there one? What does it look like?
Elminster's Guide to Making Your Own Ass Role-Playing Game.
Exactly. Is it own ass or role-playing, or is own ass role-playing?
Whichever, like own in the sense of the game owns ass. It's an ass owning. Listen, Elminster's a big gamer. He knows the lingo. It's cool.
Based on Twitch rules, it might be hard to stream that campaign.
Listen, Elminster doesn't care about your terms of service.
He does not. He doesn't.
Exactly. Matt, the question I had for you, you talked about high-level play and having access to Resurrection and whatnot. Now that you guys have started a new campaign and you're dealing with the low levels where numbers are more swingy, let's say, where player death is maybe more common because you only have 15, 20 HP or whatever. Yeah. Is that something you kind of hinted at it? And I'm not going to ask you to divulge the entire thing that might happen or may not happen on the show. But is that something that went into kind of starting campaign 2 and like, well, we might actually have a player die this time around. We need to be ready for this. Yeah.
And in the last campaign, we had a lot of conversations about it, and thankfully for Lucky Rolls, I mean, even Talison's character in the last game, when he had died, had pretty much decided that he wasn't going to come back, even if they tried to resurrect him. He's like, my story's done. He's fulfilled his goal. He wouldn't come back, and the player surprised him with some narrative elements that drew him back in. But for this game, when we were making the characters, I was very clear. I'm like, guys, you're squishy, and we might lose a few people, before the first year is done in this campaign. So be prepared for that. Some stories might not finish, and we'll see where it goes from there. I don't want it to detract from the story, but at the same time, I don't want to do a disservice to the game and the tension that is involved, both for our players and the audience. The players want that. The players aren't like, don't kill my character. Like, I mean, it would suck, but at the same time, it's thrilling, and at least give me a good death if it does happen, which is kind of what we were talking about earlier. So yeah, it's been a very open discussion, and just like any table with your players, before you start a game, you need to set the ground rules. You need to discuss what they can expect out of the story you're trying to tell. How hard is it going to be? What are the focuses? Is it roleplay versus mechanics? Is it strategy versus storytelling? Is it a blend of the two? And part of that was being very clear across the table, players and myself, that death is a very real possibility, and if it happens, it's going to be sad, but you use it to your advantage to make the end of that good story, pass on what you can to the players that survived, and then start thinking up what would be an interesting and unique new personality.
Yeah. I completely agree. In a high death rate game, it behooves the players to develop their backstory as they play.
Right.
Like, don't sit down. I mean, obviously you can if you want to, but don't sit down and write a 3-page backstory yet. Allow yourself to discover what your player's backstory is, so that by the time you're 5th level, maybe 3rd level, and it's way more likely that you're going to live to see the end of the campaign. At that point, you've got a more elaborate backstory, and that is it's okay to start playing by rolling stats, picking race and class, and just going for it, and not spending half an hour on your background. If that's the juice for you, go ahead, but you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
I don't know where I want to blame White Wolf because I love blaming White Wolf for shit.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I don't know how we got to a place where there was this expectation that a level 1 character meant anything to the world. Like, well, first I was born born in this village. He's like, shut up. I don't care about your village. I don't care about your father's sword. You are a level 1 fighter. Come back and talk to me about your backstory when you get to level 5. Because until then, you're nothing.
It's a big part of the appeal, though, I think, especially with D&D these days. Like, I have a theory that one of the things that drives D&D is we've seen games, and we talked about esports earlier, games are becoming more and more competitive, and I think they're becoming more and more skill-based. But I think for a long time, people turn to games for that feeling of like, hey, I'm important, I matter. And I can play Overwatch and now know I do not matter in the world of Overwatch. I am terrible. I am gloriously awful. I still love playing. But
well, maybe not in the grand scheme of things, but in the course of that singular game that you're playing, you definitely matter. Which I think.
Yeah, I can matter in totally dragging my team down, right? But with the but I think there is a sense now what role playing games are filling is they are very much non-competitive. Like it's very much not.
Correct.
I have to be like. I was describing to someone this idea that when I play Overwatch, I can play Tracer. I love playing Tracer. It's really fun. But I'm not that great at it, but it's still fun. Right?
I thought we were friends, Mike. I thought you were a good person, and now here we are.
No, I am not.
I'm learning so much.
It's okay. We're not judging.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Jesus.
That,
Mercer, that wasn't in the budget. You just cost me like $1 billion. I'm going to have to talk to Colville now
God forbid.
and borrow from his fucking Kickstarter.
God forbid we get through a single conversation about Overwatch without Matt reminding us that he's in the game. Thanks. Yes, we know. Matt, thank you.
I'm happy.
So when I pick Tracer, what I'm saying is I want to be this like super daring, test pilot who can travel through time, and I want to weave through the enemy team. And usually what happens is I blunder into getting headshot, I go flying off the map or whatever. But in D&D, in a role-playing game, I can just say, okay, my character runs 20 feet and jumps through the air and shoots at the enemy guy, then I activate my ability to travel back in time. And then you roll the die, and if you miss, you missed because the die said you missed. And if you hit because the die said you hit. And you feel like, great. But it's not an indictment on you as a person or your skill. It's just, okay, like that worked or it didn't. And, the game is kind of designed to like, well, it's harder to succeed against, the tougher foe or things like that. But you really have that almost automatic wish fulfillment. Like the game is not saying, okay, in order, like we very much wanted you to feel like, I want to play an awesome archer. It's like, okay, great. Pick fighter, who's the class that's good at fighting, or ranger, the class that's good at shooting bows, then pick the things that make you better at being an archer, and voila, right? It's not hidden. It's like the options are just right there.
The expectation is voila, but even with a +7, you can roll 1, 2, 3 all day long, and your idea of yourself as badass backflipping Legolas-style bowman can be totally undermined by the chaos plateau, right? Where you're just like, I'm a great ranger. No, you are not.
That's
the dice
learning the game,
say,
though, right?
Put it away.
I think that's the first time player says, I'm going to be the badass, and then they walk into the first fight and roll, like you said, the 1, 2, 3, and you realize you're just an idiot. And then that becomes the character a lot of times who can't fire a bow to hit anything to begin with. It kind of creates that backstory to begin with.
Right, and what you realize, it's not your fault. It's just the dice, right? Like you kind of, okay, I accept the dice. Sometimes they break against me, and that's just, but it doesn't say anything bad about me. The dice are there to take all the blame for when things go wrong.
Yeah. I think that speaks to what the king of Kickstarter was saying, that I'm not going to stop about how like your backstory is defined through the first few levels of play, right? You can start with a character that you do not care about and don't build a bunch of backstory for, and by the time you're level 3 or level 5, you're like, I have an understanding of this character because of the things that happened to them, right? Like I just stopped using my short bow because I couldn't hit with it, and then I got a crit the first time I used a crossbow. I'm a crossbow man now. No mechanical thing has changed, but because of that crit, you can use the dice to take your character in another direction.
Yeah.
I
want to kind of transition to Matt, and then we'll transition to the next topic. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that also depends on the kind of player, I find in my experience. There are some players who, without some sort of a hook of their own personal creation, they have a hard time finding interest, or at least finding some sort of active agency in the story. No matter who's running the game. Whether if I'm DMing, I've had many friends who've DM'd and had a player at the table that they just, at the end of the session, went, all right, that's not for me, because there wasn't something holding them in there that they felt, they had invested in. So I agree. I think and for a lot of players, especially more experienced players, it's a really, really fun way to kind of see where it takes you. But for a lot of people out there who are new to the game and are coming in because of watching streaming, because they're invested in the story and the characters, when they want to start playing, they might be more the lines of, well, I want to make a character with the story preset that my excitement at going to the table every time we have a session is to see how much more of my adventure I can unveil, how much more I can maybe get closer to this goal I had decided I might have before we started playing.
Right.
I think that's perfectly reasonable thing to want and to run a game for. And in fact, I remember in the playtest, Mike will correct me if I'm wrong, you guys described levels, at least 1 and 2, as being the apprentice levels, right?
Yeah, exactly.
This is like you were literally just a peasant a second ago. And so if you want that 4th edition, if you want that 4th edition experience of you're starting as a hero, start at 3rd level. There's nothing, I mean, apart from the fact that it's not immediately obvious how to do it. There's nothing stopping you from starting at 3rd or 5th. Or in fact, my campaign that we're going to stream, the Chain of Minyros, the players start at 5th level, and they're encouraged to develop their own backstories. But you're also going to get to watch them roll dice and generate their character from scratch. Nice. And that gives them, starting at higher level, gives them the opportunity to come up with a cool, badass backstory and be able to support it with their character sheet.
Yeah. You guys are kind of transitioning to the next topic already without my help. The levels of PCs and kind of the pacing of encounters. I think one thing that, at least when it comes to streaming, definitely when it comes to streaming, just having that number somewhere on the screen can easily dictate. DM says, hey, you see a goblin in front of you. The players know and the audience knows their power level is X. Here's a goblin. They can easily take this goblin out. But 5 seconds later, oh, there's a red dragon flying over you. Fucking run. They got to get out of here. There's no way they can fight this, right? So with that said, the audience react the same way as the players, and they want to see that red dragon over a goblin at the basic level, but you can't get to that red dragon before you kill 1,000 goblins. So there's this weird like tug that comes to what is the best level when it comes to like streaming a campaign? Is there a best level? Is there an optimum level? I kind of want to pose that to Mike to start off with. You know, what is that best level range for D&D? What's optimum?
So what we know from looking at the research we've done into the audience is that people generally start at first level and they play to somewhere from 5 to 7, then the campaign ends. But typically when the campaign ends, within like a week or 2, they have started a new campaign at first level. They'll reach about 7th level after about 6 months. Then that campaign will end. And because when we first got the day, we're like, oh my God, everyone's just quitting. We're hemorrhaging players. It's like, no, people just keep starting over and over again. The big question is, and we don't know, I don't know the answer right now. I'll be curious to see what everyone else says in the panel, is that people would happily play to level 20 if they could just find a dungeon master who stuck around long enough to get them there. That whether it's their, especially as the audience has gotten a lot younger, we see a lot more, especially high school and college age players, their schedules change. Like they just can't commit to something that's going to be that long. I also think that realistically, if someone was to tell you, hey, you should play D&D, like, oh, cool, well, that sounds fun. Yeah, and if you commit to playing, it's a 3-year, like, oh, what? Like, it's like signing up for the
you sign
Marines.
a contract
hell,
for
right?
3 years. You have to be on here every Saturday at 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, there was the 4th edition Tomb of Horrors, which I actually quite liked and would still like to run, where you could, if you wanted to, in 6 to 9 months, take characters from like 5th level to 18th, because it literally was like, here's the tomb at this level, and then you skip. You could say, here's chapter 1 of our campaign. It goes from 3rd to 7th level, and then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to restart and advance the characters to 12th level. And say, so what did you guys? It's Empire Strikes Back, right? What happened between Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back? You guys tell me, right? Well, and then in a very short period of time, we've gone from to.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That kind of stuff fits really well with streaming too, because we expect this episodic TV style, seasonally cut format of gameplay. So you can be like, season 1 was everybody from level 1 to 3, and season 6 is everybody from level 18 to 20, and you can kind of skip the middle bits because as long as you actively choose to do recaps or stop and say like, all right, this is the beginning of season 6. Let's talk about what happened. You can do that. I tend to think of D&D like a bit like listening to an album, in that the first 3 tracks of the album are going to get the most play. Doesn't matter if they're the best. Doesn't matter if it's the most fun to be levels 1, 2, and 3. That's just the thing people will do the most. And if you want to get to when the levee breaks, you have to get through 4 sticks and go into California, right? Like you have to get through that, unless you skip to it. But the question, I guess, becomes: is it worth making people get all the way there? Is it worth doing all that play, or do you think you can have a decent game experience jumping in at level 12 if you've never played D&D before?
Yeah, that's.
I think if you've never played 12th, is going to be insane, right? It's going to be so much stuff for you to track.
We've done that on our own show, and it's rough putting people in at level 3, and they're just like, I do what? I can do what? Okay.
Yeah.
Let's figure that out. Yeah,
we had a lot of guests throughout the last season Critical Role who had never played D&D before, but with the campaign was at level 12, level 15, level 16, and they came on, and so it was like trying to help make a character based on their concept that was simple enough and point out like, well, these are your bread and butter abilities, just focus on these type of thing. And for the most part, it was a little confusing. It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, but it is a lot to throw at you. And especially if you're going to be playing this ongoing, your level advancement assumes that you're learning your techniques and their synergies over a period of time. To jump 6 to 10 levels,
right?
It's practically learning a whole new character. And from a streaming standpoint, that can really bog down and slow down combat. Even our players, who are all actors and by no means the most optimal strategic players in the world, have played all the way up to level 20, and even they were having a hard time remembering all the things they could do. And especially if you multi-class and you're trying to figure out which, am I more of a rogue this round? Am I more of a paladin? What am I doing? It can get a little unwieldy.
No one's chat, Mercer, so no one can be chat. We're good. No one's going to be that good.
Right.
We can all aspire.
We can all aspire to be as good as chat. Yeah, exactly. You mentioned kind of the pacing of encounters, and I think that ties into the levels in terms of what's optimum. You ran a campaign, like you said, from when Critical Role started streaming it, what was the starting level for you guys? Do you remember?
It was around 7 or 8, I think, when we first started.
So you've done 7 to all the way to 1920. In terms of like the pacing of that, is it, in streaming it, is it difficult to always have a fight almost be like a set piece rather than just like, hey, you're walking on the road, here's some goblins, or here's X monster?
This is going to be an interesting discussion.
Yeah, this is a discussion me and Koebel have had a few times. I grew up playing. I grew up playing Final Fantasy, so for me, random encounters I thought was part of the role-playing game experience.
Yeah.
And as I played through the years, I found that occasionally doing random encounters, or things that weren't tied to the narrative necessarily, could be fun for players. I found that the player engagement was much stronger when the battle had story implications or was driving the narrative forward. And so for our game, as we began to stream it, if you look back at the early episodes, it was a classic dungeon crawl. They're in the Underdark. They would encounter like a group of ogres and things that are a lot easier to do at the lower levels. Higher level creatures and the level of abilities that are around there tend to take more time. And so you begin to decide as a dungeon master, is it more worth it to have the same number of battles before you get to a boss encounter? Or do you want to just focus on those, handful of small set piece battles that feel more epic for the players, and then from a streaming standpoint, more interesting for the audience as well?
Yeah, don't even get me started on the adventuring day.
Oh yeah,
we're going to talk about that. We should.
We are.
I did a poll on Twitter, and that was kind of I'm sure Mike remembers this, where I just asked my followers, how many encounters do you typically get through in an adventuring day? And in the tweet, I said, not a session, between 2 long rests. And like 60% of them, the answer was 1.
Yeah, fucking 1. It's always 1.
It was 1. It was 1. That's
how it is.
That's not people streaming. Streaming. That has nothing to do with online play. That has nothing to do with an audience.
Yeah.
That is people in general. And there were like, I think 1,700 people responded. It wasn't like 20 people. So what seemed to me a statistically significant number of people responded saying, and by the way, no one was getting through like 6 or 7. It was like
I believe the assumption
2 or 3
in the book is 8. I think 8 is the 8 encounters.
It's 6 to 8, something like that. Yeah.
To be fair,
I presume that was during a time early in development where they didn't really know.
Well, encounters in that degree also what encompassed, skill challenges of skill-based encounters. We're trying to break, things that were outside of combat. Encounters are broken down into kind of this amorphous thing. But that's also the issue is when you're reading the book for the first time and it says 8 encounters a day, you assume it means battle encounters.
Because that advice is in the how to take monsters and build them into an encounter section. So that's maybe why people think that. Yeah.
Maybe.
But yeah, that's definitely like there has to be some way to address not the action economy, but like basically the healing and recovery economy. When every battle, the players all can go supernova. Yeah. And I think I have ideas for how to address it. I don't know if they're going to work. We'll see.
Yeah, it's really interesting because we see most players don't really get beyond 7th level. In some ways, I could imagine us trying to really radically redesign how high levels work, and using that to flow back to how we conceptualize the adventuring day and what that means. At one point in 4th edition development, we kind of had this idea. There's this big argument. There's a huge row over encounters versus the day, and should everything reset at the end of every fight. And I never was a fan of like, okay, at the end of the fight, everything resets, because that to me felt like it means every fight is the same volume, right? There's no change in the dynamic. It's always all or nothing. Like the fight had to either threaten to wipe out the party or it wasn't, and there was no middle ground. And you had to really work as a dungeon master to make the fights feel different.
Yeah, that's where we ended up with Court of Swords, where it was a deadly encounter, long rest, deadly encounter, long rest, and it was just that for the whole first 50 episodes. Yeah.
Yeah. And oh, sorry, go ahead. Oh.
No, you go ahead.
And what we tried to, so in 4th edition, it's this idea, I sort of half baked it and never really got it implemented. But there was this idea of like thinking, how do you expand the encounter to be bigger so that if you're in a dungeon level, the encounter is the entire level of the dungeon? And is there a way you can give people a framework where the sum danger presented by that entire dungeon level like can work out to essentially be kind of like this giant battle, so that if the party draws aggro from everything in the level, like that can kind of work. If they're smart and pick off one thing at a time, like that's the smarter way to play, try to give DMs more flexibility. But it never, for 4th edition, it was very weird. It's one of those things that play tested very well, but trying to translate it into a system that other people could run.
I mean, that strategy seems good to me. Like that's how you beat against the slavers, right? You just run in, aggro all the slavers in the dungeon, get them back to the entrance, and then just murder them there, and then you're done.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you win Gen Con. So.
Yeah.
Speaking as somebody who has played competitive D&D at tournaments and has won, I love that comment.
I would say also to that point, when you consider that many encounters per adventuring day, it's a lot of responsibility on the dungeon master to try and make each of those small encounters interesting enough for the players feel like it's still a worthwhile experience. Otherwise, you're just throwing more hit point bags at them just because the book told you to, and to make it seem like you're expending their resources in a meaningful way. And I mean, it's already a lot of pressure on the dungeon master to prepare these games for their friends and their players anyway. So if there is a way that we can continue going forward to consider minimizing the effort, or at least the pressure on the dungeon master to prepare so many unique, interesting encounters, and instead focus on the narrative bits and the set piece battles, and have ways that can still expend player resources and still make them feel like it's a challenge to get to these big battles, that would be a huge boon, I think, to everyone playing the game.
Yeah, because the thing is, when I think back to Doom, playing Doom back in the 90s, that sort of style of first-person shooter where I have my health and there are a finite number of health packs on this level. Yeah. And if I screw up and use all the health packs, but still am at 1% health and still have half the levels monsters running around, I've screwed up. I have to reload. But I've done, right?
It's like food in NetHack.
Yeah. Yeah. So how can you translate that to a tabletop game in a way that, and I think it's doable, it's just a matter of putting some time into it. But I think that might be a path forward where you're thinking of it as more of a flexible tool, rather than thinking of it as this could be one giant fight, or this could be an entire dungeon's levels worth of monsters, or you could break this up into whatever, you're traveling from point A to point B, and here are the 4 things you have to deal with, right? Here's the ambush, and here's the weird oracle who might attack you if you anger her, or things like that. And I actually think at the end of the day, that might actually be a system that's a lot easier for especially beginning dungeon masters to understand. Because you're kind of telling them, here's your roster, fill up your tank with danger and then deploy that danger across your map or whatever it is you've got, and now you're good to go.
I would love to see that.
Yeah, there are games that mechanically do that, right? Like I'm thinking of the very short-lived Marvel heroic role-playing game where the GM would build up Doom Pool, and you could spend the Doom Pool to be like, normally this is an encounter with 10 Hydra agents, but I'm going to spend 2 points of my Doom Pool, and it's 10 Hydra agents and, I don't know, some Sentinels, because whatever. So you had a resource. You had a resource as a GM to be able to spend in at the time you needed. So if you were like, okay, this is going to be an easy encounter, it's no big deal, we'll let them go through it. I'm going to hold on to my Doom Pool, but as things get higher and you ramp up the thing, you're spending your points to buy those things. And it wasn't to giving the GM permission to do that stuff. It was giving the GM a fuel tank to know how much they had left.
Exactly. Yeah. And that kind of goes. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Matt.
I think that, one thing I don't know that we've talked about is what is the purpose of having multiple encounters in an adventuring day? We've talked about, and I really like the idea, and I think it's kind of natural. I think we've seen Matt do it on Critical Role, the notion that a level of a dungeon could be one battle. right? And what he'll do is he'll say, this is kind of the entrance, this beginning, middle, and end, and then that's it. That's the level of the dungeon. And I like that stuff. I think you can simplify it even more and make it more dramatic, and I think the players would go for it. But why do we have an assumption that there should be multiple encounters in an adventuring day? And is there a way to make the game conform to our expectation rather than changing our expectations to conform to the game?
Yeah. And one of the big barriers we have with Fifth specifically to trying to adopt a different paradigm. Wow, the word I use that and I meant to. Like that's
we're gonna synergize our paradigm.
Yeah.
You did it for real. And you meant it like not in the mage way either.
Yeah. But the challenge right now we have short rest and long rest mechanics. So that actually is like a giant like we'd have to be aware of that when if we're changing how to build things.
Right, true.
Because
Yeah.
That is like,
you don't want to screw the warlock, right?
Yeah,
He's
exactly.
The one who gets all the stuff back in a short rest. There was a game, and I'm going to try this, by the way. I've worked on this. I'm going to try it for my next campaign. So I think people will get to see it succeed or fail, or somewhere in between, more likely. Where there was a game which I just literally happened to have sitting next to me that I actually quite liked, the Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay from Fantasy Flight. Maybe too many notes here, Mozart, but it was still like they had this cool thing of the party sheet. And my idea of how the party sheet would work was different than their implementation. But I like the notion that here are the rounds of combat, right? And so you get the sense that there's a bound on how long a battle can last, thank God, right? Something's going to happen toward the end that's going to make it so one team wins or the other team loses. But also I like that notion that you could have the party sheet say, like, listen, if this is the second encounter in the day, then on turn 3, everybody gets this thing. Right, kind of like the action point system from 4th edition. On the 3rd encounter of the day, on the 4th encounter, and you would literally have these things marked on the thing, like, hey, if we press on, then that means on turn 2 in the next battle, we get to do this cool thing, and people would be like, yeah, and then you have this less of a sense of, well, we've been fighting for 18 seconds, now we need to rest for 24 hours.
Yeah.
It's
not a good stamina ratio if you can only go for 18 seconds. And like, nope, see you tomorrow.
Action points work in 4th edition. I literally watched what was said in the player's handbook or the DM's guide happened at the table where the players were like, guys, if we press on, we get an action point. And I just feel like I think there are more interesting ways. I think there are more flavorful ways to take that same mechanic and deploy it. So each battle, the players are like, hey, should we press on? Because if we do, we get this cool thing.
Yeah, that's an awesome thing.
I like that better because for what we've had to do for our game a lot of times is I just had to think of consequences for them not pushing on.
Yeah,
and once again, it puts more pressure on the dungeon master. You have to
have a carrot than a stick.
Exactly. So if there's a way to implement something like that, some sort of benefit to get to the players wanting to continue forward, that would be tremendous.
And you see these kinds of mechanisms represented in a bunch of different ways in varying degrees of success, right? Like sometimes there are systems that are like, okay, we're going to count up, and every round you get a +1. Everybody gets a +1 to their attack rolls, and and that just feels, that kind of thing just feels like, okay, like by the time you're at round 6, you're killing everything in one hit. It's just because we're all bored of this and we're going to move on. It doesn't escalate the fiction. It just makes it go away quickly. But there certainly needs to be a balance somewhere between the fictional stuff, the like, if you don't finish this fight in 6 rounds, then the train runs over the Goblin Princess.
That's super pulp. That's Indiana Jones, right? That's classic pulp, which D&D is built. The skeleton of D&D is pulp fantasy. It's Conan and that kind of stuff. So it's perfect Ludo narrative harmony.
Yeah. And that was some of the stuff at one point in 4E when we were talking about this idea, like, how can you structure the encounters so they're more interesting, they're more dramatic. We had a lot of ideas built in, like, these never got implemented, but we had concepts like, the more you cast a spell, the better you get at it during the course of a day. Right. So if I'm a fire mage and I'm channeling fire, then I start getting this halo effect that starts building up. And so now I can't access my higher level stuff until I've used my lower level stuff.
Mike, I hope you're not the person that axed that idea at Wizards of the Coast.
No, I wasn't. No, because
that's a great idea.
Where we just didn't have that was Rob Haynes who had a lot of that stuff. I remember working with him on it, and he had a lot of really funky ideas to recharge. That's what we call them, the recharge mechanics. But we ran out of runway. I mean, that's kind of the story of 4E in a lot of ways, is running out of runway as they're trying to get the plane up in the air. So, but it's still something I think about sometimes. Like, with the Warlock, would it be cool to say, okay, if you reap souls for your master, then your master's pleased. So that's when you start.
Yes,
getting
it would
more
be
stuff.
cool.
Yes,
cool.
I think 5e's ostensible enough to be able to survive that kind of. I mean, look at the DMs Guild, right? Like people are making things that show that they have a clear understanding of how 5e works. It's a framework you can build things onto. But if you're not aware of the DMs Guild, if you're not at that level, there is still like this kind of vast empty space where like, well, why doesn't the game already do this? And for me, the thing is getting people from here's the core books and here's the advanced, like you're making your own shit and selling it on the internet. It's that middle space that I want to see people gap. Yeah.
And by the way, this is literally, I'm thinking about this for my players in my next game while we're talking. You don't have to solve the game. You only have to solve your players. So if Mike says something like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if the fire mage's stuff gets blah, 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 you don't have to sit there and come up with, that's cool. How would that work for every class and every specialty? Just do it for your characters. Right. Just ad hoc it as you go. Right. And the players will help you. They will help you. They will love that idea. You don't have to solve you don't have to solve the player's handbook. You only have to solve the characters at the table.
Yeah, like for Travis's character in the new campaign as a warlock, and based on the kind of the set piece battle, smaller encounter numbers that we've seen in the previous campaign, that was a worry I had, and we had this conversation, Koebel, at my place, where I don't want him to feel shafted with the short rest mechanic not being as effective if this is how many encounters we're running on an adventuring day. So like I'm toying with a few ideas in the campaign to have like a trade-off where an ability where he can use an action to sacrifice a hit dice equal to his level to get a spell slot back, and ways to kind of balance it a little bit just to tailor to that character. Hit dice are great for that.
I love hit dice.
Yeah,
I think we should be seeing more cool ways to sacrifice hit dice.
Yeah, so I'm toying with some mechanics there, but we'll see how it plays out. But I think, like you said, tailoring to the player is an easy way to begin that trek.
Yeah,
where you're not having to worry about an across-the-board release to a community and hope everybody's happy with it or not, shitting on you at Reddit for your design.
Yeah.
Just the person at the table.
Yeah.
And and if they're happy, then usually the group will be happy.
That comes at the end of the campaign when you sell the rule book, right?
Right.
Look, if the fact that people can monetize their campaign right now means that we are in some kind of paradise.
Awesome. Well, I mean, we've come.
Hats off to Wizards of the Coast for doing the kind of Valve-esque. Very Steam-like Dungeon Masters Guild. I'm super happy that they did that.
We've come full circle, right? Because that's how D&D was. OD&D was like Gary and Dave made the game, and then everybody's 100%. Like, "Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Dave. Here's my better version of your stupid game. I call it
Arduin Grimoire,
Truncheons and Flagons, and it's $1 for my zine, and I'll send it to you from my basement." And there was no industry. It was just people making up their own shit for D&D. And it worked. Right?
Do you think that the idea, to kind of expand on that a little bit, the idea of if you're going to stream a show, taking risk, like Matt was just describing in terms of adding things, or both Matts were describing, adding things to the characters that's only specific to your campaign that might not work for the larger audience, but it works for the show. Do you think that's something that more streams should take into account to make them unique and stand out to other campaigns, where it's not just like, here's another campaign at level 3. We're going to go into this dungeon and fight some kobolds. It's here's a wizard that, like Colville was saying, that has fire coming around his head the more he casts fire spells, et cetera, et cetera. Like, should they try to be unique in that sense?
I don't know.
Design. I mean, shit. Design in public is terrifying, right? Like if you're like, all right, let's say I'm like, I have a player and they're like, I like some of these classes, but I don't like all of them, and I would like to play something that's kind of like this, but there isn't one of those in the game. And you as a GM are like, okay, cool. Well, I'm gonna do this thing, and we're gonna make this class for you. And we're gonna play it. You have to endure every single episode people in the audience being like, this class is unbalanced, you're an idiot, you don't know how to design, you don't understand 5th edition, why did you do this? Just play a ranger, just play a warlock, just play a fighter, whatever. You're going to get that feedback whether you ask for it or not. Yeah. It's like Steam Greenlight, right? This is the it's not done, so every day is a playtest. And some people really like watching playtests. Some people love tuning in to a thing before it's done. They love being able to see what is this class going to be like when it's finished? But you have to accept that mostly you will keep fucking it up. People will notice and hate it, and it takes work to do that. Playtesting in secret is much safer than playtesting in front of 1,000 people.
I'm going to say something I might. By the time I'm done with this paragraph, I may have talked myself out of it. But I think that there is something virtuous about running a game in front of people on a stream and busting out your own experimental house rules because you're showing everyone this is how it works, bro. It is all about trying and failing.
Agreed.
It's baseball. It's not basketball. It's about if you get a hit 1 out of every 3 times at bat, you're one of the greatest players that's ever lived. Right? It's get up and give it a shot. Part of me thinks that it is virtuous to try that. And if that means, listen, if those people are complaining the whole time, they're engaged. They're complaining, and that's their level of engagement. And I have people, every video I upload, somebody goes, I really hate the way you talk so fast. And I'm like, I just respond. I go, I'm pretty happy with the way the video went.
99% of feedback, 99% of feedback is, I would have done it differently, phrased as "fuck you, die."
Correct. Yeah. Correct. But that's those people that are kind of shouting out into the cave, and all they hear is their echoes coming back. Those people, that's their level of engagement, and it's up to you as the person streaming. I guess this is where we're getting to like streaming advice, which, by the way, I am not the expert on. I've only streamed for like 20 or 30 hours. It's up to you to figure out, how am I going to survive as a human being with bleeding on the keyboard in front of people and then being criticized. It's up to you to figure out where you draw the line in engaging with your audience.
Well, I think it's also the audience too, right? Like, I know from my experience, this isn't streaming, but with panels at shows like Gen Con or wherever, that there is definitely like if we were to say, we're gonna have a panel and tell you the next product, we get 1 billion people to show up. If we do a panel and it's like, we're gonna give you advice on how to be a good DM, we get a bunch of people showing up. When you do something that's more like, here's like the technical side of game design, you get a smaller audience. Now, it's an engaged audience, right? Sure. But it is smaller, right? I think there are a lot of people. So it would really depend if the audience is showing up, like, I want to watch a cool story, and the mechanics start to get in the way, like where it is about the class that's not functioning or that's too good.
Yeah.
I have found that the people who care about mechanics really care, but it is a subset. It's maybe like 20% of the people.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about the number of people you might be alienating with your noodly nonsense,
right?
Because they showed up for the characters and the drama.
Over the course of this discussion, I've realized that it might be in the best interest, if you are going to stream, to just do the most basic thing, because more people are going to be able to relate that, because they're playing the most basic thing themselves.
Yeah. I mean, that does sound like good advice to me, but I know that for me, I can't resist. I'm not going to curtail my own game designer proclivities.
Sure.
I'm going to be busting stuff out, and we're going to see it fail live.
Well, from a perspective of like marketing your stream as a product to be consumed, the differentiation between you and what's in the player's handbook can be a draw for the audience, right? Sure. Like if you can say, my campaign setting is really different, and these are the ways in which it's different, or I've changed some classes, or we've thrown out alignment and we're using this other thing, or I'm doing a different XP system, there is a subset of the audience who will tune in to be like, oh, this is really interesting. Maybe I can do this. Maybe this is a different thing that I could implement.
And keep in mind
it does require that you have an idea of what that's going to be and are willing to kind of bumble through it as you build it.
Yeah. A non-trivial amount of every stream ever has been people arguing about the rules and looking things up.
Totally.
Yeah. Right. So that's part and parcel of D&D. There's no way around it. It can be minimized. But if you're going to be sitting around arguing about the rules anyway, isn't it more interesting to be talking about your rules that you made up than it is the ones that everybody already kind of knows?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's also too not worrying. I mean, obviously, if you're relying on the audience size of your stream for your income, then this is a different discussion, or just how you want to look at it. But I know sometimes it is easy to look at, well, how can I maximize the number of people watching and build from there? Like in the tabletop role-playing game space, that is something that has always been weird to me. Coming into the industry in the late 90s, there was, I don't know how many times I've heard people say things like, well, I was going to design a science fiction game, but people told me that those don't sell, so I didn't. And it's like, but like, you're just like, you're like a software engineer, like you're doing this just for fun, right? Like, why do you care, right?
Yeah,
100%. It was a mistake for you to think that anything was going to sell. So just do what you want.
You're saying like 500 copies versus 1,000, like, it turns out to be a big hit, but it's just one of those things that has always been interesting to me. Like, I think there is a culture in role-playing games that is really worried about, like, how big was the event at Gen Con? Like, how big was your booth? Like, how many people showed up? And I think there's this weird, it's not commercialism, it's almost more like the prestige of it. Yeah. And, it's something that I think has hurt the development of role-playing games, because we do have to kind of understand that, like, you're going to get a lot of people to buy a game and just to consume it versus want to understand why it's designed the way it is.
Sure.
And that it's okay. Like, it doesn't always have to be about maximizing that number.
And that's what's so great about the sort of small press game design space is that at this point, doing a game that you only sell 100 copies of and then you leave it behind and move on to your next thing isn't going to bankrupt you, right? Like you can run a small Kickstarter, you can do the thing, you can be like, here's my weird game about this one weird thing that this game does. It's an experiment. Some people like it. You move on, you do another thing. It's not like you have to work on it for 10 years, buy 10,000 copies of it from a printer, buy the booth at Gen Con, sell 100 copies, and then just like cry into your beer for the rest of your life because we're not in that space anymore. Like experimentation across the board is so much easier now.
Yeah. It's one thing I think that has really held role-playing games back for a long time. I think, like I said, it is changing. But for ages, it was, you think of if you wanted to write a novel, you just wrote it, right?
Sure.
And if you wanted to publish if you wanted to make a role-playing game, it's like, well, you've got to write it, you've got to get the Gen Con booth, you've got to print it, you have to get the art. Like the barriers to entry were kind of crazy, right? And I think there's still perceptions of those, but I think that is something that's, especially with the new audience coming in, I think that's really changing.
I want to go back to something you said when we were talking about rules, because I might not ever get a chance to ask this question again. How much do you see, Mearls, at Wizards, people asking questions or arguing with rules because of what happened on shows that were streamed? Is that like an everyday occurrence where something happens and you're like, well, so-and-so did this on their stream and they're obviously wrong. Can you verify what I'm saying?
Customer support people have to watch Critical Role now so they know what people are going to be calling about tomorrow.
Yeah.
No, we actually don't see much of that. Like,
really?
Now, I know personally myself, I very rarely have anyone ask me about, hey, this happened in the stream. Now, what might be happening, and we are a little bit aware of this, I might just get asked a question. Like, Crawford and I definitely know this because they will definitely do like ask mom, then ask dad, kind of like, hey, so we'll have people like, often if they're doing it, if they're trying to prove that they're right, they don't want us to know it's part of an argument. So they want us to just give an answer.
Hypothetically, if some morons were saying that you could totally target this, some idiots said we could do this, what would you say to those idiots?
Yeah, exactly. But it is usually, the most common case is they will ask Crawford a question or me, and then ask the other person and then go, well, Jeremy said this.
I feel like there are 4 core rule books for D&D now, right? There's the Player's Handbook, there's the Monster Manual, there's the Dungeon Master's Guide, and there's Jeremy Crawford's Twitter account.
Exactly.
And that's where all the rules come from.
Yep.
How much,
for good or for ill?
to expand on that a little bit, how much internally are you guys seeing what happens on other streams? Or I guess the basis question is, do you guys watch streams to see what should be done about the game for future updates or anything like that?
Oh yeah, no, because we've got our own shows we run,
right?
And that might be a slate expanding. It definitely does, because this goes back to when we made Fifth. We were really aiming it at new players, and the playtest was all about, hey, existing players, are we going to piss you off? And luckily, the answer was the opposite, like, hey, this is great. And I think we kind of touched on this earlier. We are now really starting to understand the culture around the game. And I think in a theoretical 6th edition or the next book that looks kind of like, the rules expansion, you would see more stuff that is so almost, in that meta mechanic. Here's how to make your game function better. Here's how to think of things in a way that might be clearer and easier and make the game smoother for you, as opposed to just like, here are mechanics for ships, or like, here's 20 new prestige class or whatever, not prestige class, just subclasses, things like that. Yeah. So, because I think like that was actually the point which I knew the audience had really changed, was when we tried to playtest prestige classes, and people overwhelmingly hated them. And it was fascinating, right? You coming in from 3rd, you're like, no way, right? People love these things. And overwhelming, and we got so many comments, people were just like, why are you adding this to the game? It makes no sense. Like, I choose my class, I choose my race, then at some point I choose my subclass, then I'm done. Like, why would I then make another class choice? No, yeah, right? That's weird, right? That doesn't make any sense.
At first level, you figure out what prestige class you're going to be at 18th level, and then you track backwards.
You have a map.
Granularly. And then every time you gain a level, you're not making any decisions at all because you made them all at first level.
Yep, you made them all first. And it was interesting to see the culture of the game. That's why I knew like we had definitely changed things. Like there was a sea change. Like, because just we saw so little support for the concept, and again, just a lot of baffled game. Now, people have been with the game since 3rd. We're like, hey, this is great. When are you going to implement it? And I think it was like only like 30-something% positive. Now, keep in mind for us, like 50% positive is like, oh, that's not good, right? Like we'd have a lot of people. Most players aren't like hyper analyzing the rules. Like that sounds cool, and they just check yes, I like it. But I mean, we calibrate that, for like our answers.
Everything.
But But yeah, seeing the percentage that low was just, I think it's the single worst rated thing we've ever play tested.
There's got to be a subset of fans, and I've seen this that feel like 5th edition is a step backwards. That complexity is good, more complexity is better, and that any attempt to incorporate new players by reduction of complexity is like a mistake, that you're betraying the core foundations of what D&D is. So that by the time we get to like 12th edition, it's going to be Traveler, and no one will be able to play it anymore.
Yeah.
Wait, what? Can we just jump straight to that? Why do we need editions 6 through 11?
Matt, I'll play Traveler with you.
I love Traveler. That's an interesting point. I wonder if, like, it's funny because D&D 5 is already, it's a pretty complex game. Like, if you don't assume everything about D&D, if you're just like, I like playing Minecraft, it's like, this is super crazy complex. I wonder if there's not a way to kind of, or any even reason to introduce a concept of prestige classes back into the game somehow. Because I definitely love that idea that, there's lots of Eldritch Knights out there, but I'm maybe the only fill in the blank.
This is the thing that I think is interesting about the DMs Guild and the idea generally of having like an SRD or opening your game up to group development is that the first thing that any community will do when you open your game up to being developed is they will ruin it in every way you actively chose not to ruin it when you made the game in the first place. Yeah. So all those things that you were like, this is going to be a terrible idea, let's cut it. That'll be the first thing someone in the community will make, right? But that's why we do that, right? So that the core development of the game can continue. You can continue to creative direct it in the way you want. And if people really want prestige classes, someone can make the PDF that introduces them, and they can make X amount of money, where X is the number of people that want to buy that. But the game itself can retain a purity of vision in the sense of like, this is still the D&D that is the core set of the rules.
I have a question for Matt. Do you ever, when you're working with your players on their characters and you're listening to the kind of stuff they want to do and you're thinking about how to do it, do you ever consciously decide, you know what, I'm going to try to find a way to do this just with the player's handbook? Because even though I, Matt Mercer, could come up with some cool thing, I don't want to deal with the people watching. Or do you just say, no, screw them, I'm going to, like, Blood Hunter, let's go, this is great?
I generally just want, because primarily we're still playing the game for ourselves, and then everyone wants that to change.
Awesome. Good.
The player's enjoyment, I think, is what will engage an audience more than anything, and as long as we're happy as players, ultimately, it doesn't matter how people watch it, we're still having a good time.
Like, if you concoct some crazy, prestige class, for Liam's character, for Caleb, if Liam thinks this is awesome, then first of all, who cares what the audience thinks at that point? But I will tell you that a whole bunch of them will like it, right? Because Liam is engaged with it and he's excited by it.
Yeah.
Right. Well, like for instance, the Blood Hunter, I never set out to design anything. I'm not a game designer by trade at any means, but we ran a one shot for Vin Diesel for this one promo for his Witch Hunter movie, and they're like, can you make him his Witch Hunter character? It's like, I guess, and I threw something together haphazardly for him. And then it was this overwhelming community request of like, can you release the rules for whatever he played? I'm like, there aren't any.
Vin Diesel made a class. Of course the community wants to see the Vin Diesel's class.
Right. But I was like, I don't have one, so I guess I'll cobble something together, but I don't want to call it his character.
It's Vin Diesel. You can play Vin Diesel.
One of the most common comments I get in my videos is when I talk about something I do at my table, people are like, that sounds cool. How do you do that? Yeah. And I'm like, I just told you how I did it. That was it. That was the whole thing. There's not a secret tome where I've got you saw the whole thing. Just there's not. You believe in yourself. You can do it. Just make it up as you go.
Yeah, and if you go back, you can see like when I started the class, it was awful. I was still learning. I was still learning the balance and the design of the game, and like every iteration was me releasing it publicly, being lambasted and set on fire, and going, okay, I see what I did wrong. Thank you for the intense feedback, but the feedback nevertheless. And, it's just, I've learned a lot as I progress. And that's how any of us do. You start and you create something that sounds like it's fun and interesting and unique to your game. And then you try it out and it will succeed in some ways. It'll fail in others. And then you update it and learn from that, and it's a scary thing to throw things out there. Like you said earlier, play testing live like that can be a very scary thing. But if it's something you want to do and you're passionate about, then I think that's more important than being conscious of what the audience.
Because that's what the audience is there because they want to see people engaged. Yeah. They want to see you as a dungeon master having this cool idea and get excited. And then if the players are excited by it, then you won. That's victory.
I'm going to read this comment from Twitch chat. It says, way to throw Vin Diesel under the bus, Matt. I'm pretty sure Vin Diesel's doing all right. Okay.
Listen,
I'm pretty sure he's going to be in the next Fast and the Furious still. Maybe
in a battle between Vin Diesel and Bus, I know who I'm putting my money on. So
yeah,
I've
all
watched
seen
movies.
Fast
I know how
and
that
Furious.
goes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Ride or die.
Oh, Jesus. Anyways, to jump over, we're kind of all over the place because there's so much to talk about. But I do want to hit on the point of, experience and how it shapes play. And Matt, I think you're and Adam, we've switched Court of Swords to be narrative style. But I want to talk on, in the aspect of streaming, do you both agree that narrative style is the best way or the way that you're playing right now on your streams, respectively, for D&D?
In my experience, there's in regards to like, do you play the game as much like it is written, ignoring the fact that you have an audience to cater to? There's basically two ways to split it, right? There's the people who want the game as it is, and there's people who want the characters and the game is secondary. And if you tried to do a show that was your primary business source, it was a primary source of your income, you tried to do a show that was just, we're playing by the rules, we don't care what chat likes or doesn't like, we're going to play as if they weren't here, you would not be able to succeed. Like, there are people who are like that, but the audience size is not enough to be successful. I think that most people tune in to watch the characters do things and to get attached to the characters, and the rules are there to add drama and add chaos and move the narrative in different directions. But mostly people are there because they like the characters first and foremost.
Yeah.
I mean, that Court of Swords was that experiment for us to be like, we're just doing the thing, and we're only going to play by the rules, and it's going to be hard mode D&D, and characters die all the time. And we saw like the feedback was there were some people who were like, yes, this is great, I love it, keep playing D&D in hardcore mode. But more than 2/3 of the audience were like, I'm getting fatigued, like I'm getting tired, I need to attach to the characters, and you can't keep taking them away from me at random like this, or I'm going to stop watching.
I want Mercer to answer this, but we're going to Koebel afterwards because his facial expressions are too good not to give an answer. Mercer, what do you want to weigh in?
Is for us, now we're talking like the mechanics of experience and character advancement.
Yeah, just like in terms of narrative style versus combat.
Right. It depends on the table, really. I find experience was very important for a lot of my gaming years when you had players at the table that felt that experience points were a quantitative way of showing that they were doing good.
A score.
And that they had succeeded.
Yeah, it's a score.
And
Totally.
it's a scoreboard, and also to make sure that there wasn't an unfair unbalance if a player couldn't be there at the table. There was there wasn't as much of a congealed unit, especially when a game started. And unless you're a group of friends and you're all like excited to be there and help each other out, it wasn't a huge deal. But if you had people from different walks of life and different groups coming together, to be kind of a shitty thing to be like, hey, how come we're at the same level, but he's been gone for 3 weeks? It's bullshit, that would come up a lot. I find the older
it's not fair. He wasn't here.
Exactly. I find that is less of an issue the older you get, and the more the community matures a bit as a whole. And for me, I started our last campaign was experience based, and I still have this huge Excel chart that is just a nightmarish anomaly over 5 years of our campaign, where I've been individual character experience and who got better bits for character moments, and I was keeping track for every campaign, and it was just so much bookkeeping for a party and a group of friends that I realized didn't care. And so with the new campaign, I was like, can we just do away with experience points and make it a narrative-based level advancement? And they went, that's an option?
Right.
Yes, okay, let's do that. And I mean, we're trying it out now for the first time, and I'm already loving it. So I think it's a great way to do it, but you have to ensure that the table is excited for it and won't consider that a point of contention between them.
It's really important to remember too that there's a secondary for you and I, for Matt and I talking about streaming games. There's a secondary player incentive, right? Like if you're playing at your table, you have like the group is having fun, and you're getting experience points as like explicit and implicit kind of rewards. But there's also the like, is the audience digging what we're doing? And that in a lot of ways can override, like, do we care about experience? Because if I'm in a campaign and I'm like, no, I love experience points because they let me know I'm winning at D&D and I'm winning harder and faster than everyone else I'm playing with. But if I'm streaming that game, that's secondary to, am I making my character in a way that people like to watch, right? Am I getting people to view? Are they tuning in? Are they telling me like, your character is awesome? Are they making fan art? Are they doing the thing? Because that's a bigger priority for a stream than like winning D&D. So there is that additional thing that most people won't get. That won't happen in most campaigns.
Mr. King of Kickstarter, you're doing a show pretty soon because of the King of Kickstarter.
That's
Are you going to go?
One of the things that Kickstarter was for is getting studio space so we could stream our next game.
Exactly. Are you going to go narrative? Are you going to go combat? Are you going to try to mix it? Where are you at?
Well, I definitely think we're going to use Milestone XP if that's what you're talking about when you say narrative.
I'm
old enough. Yeah, I'm old enough that I remember when not only did you get XP for killing monsters, you also got XP for gold.
Yeah.
When I posted that on Twitter or my subreddit, many people literally didn't understand what I meant. They thought like you spent you spent your gold.
Yeah, you go to the XP shop and you put gold in. It's not EA, ladies and gentlemen. This is old school
1,000 gold pieces. Yeah. You just got 1,000 XP. I mean, split with the party, and you got the gold pieces. There was no I'm a big believer, and I think this may be a philosophical difference between me and a lot of other modern dungeon masters. Is I'm a big believer in. If you have 6 players, there's a good chance you have 6 different motivations. Why are those people there? It's very like running a company. All your employees are there for different reasons. No 2 employees are created equal, and it's up to you as the person behind the screen to understand, why is this person here? Why is this person here? My player Lars likes getting XP. He's the guy at the end that's like, we killed these monsters. How much are they worth? It's not my place to tell him that is a primitive way to think. You should be more enlightened. You should be caring only about advancing the story. This gets back to the whole adventuring day thing. I come from an era where you measured your progress. I think we talked about this in the last stream, in how many rooms you made it through. Right? But I don't think that way anymore. I still have some of that in me. I still now think more in terms of what did we achieve? We found something out, right? We stopped something from happening, right? We advanced the narrative somewhat. I think that players it should be okay if the juice for you is we threw the ring into Mount Doom, we saved the world, A+. Or I found a lot of gold and we fought a dragon and got a whole bunch of gold. A+. Those are both totally valid as far as I'm concerned. I also remember I played Champions. I ran a Champions game every week for 3 years, and you only ever got like 1 experience point in a given session because that's how their XP worked, and you spent it. And after a little while, I just stopped giving XP, and no one noticed. And that's the EL6. That's the EL6 style of play, right? You hit 6th level, and D&D is a very 3rd edition kind of old school way of playing. You hit 6th level, and that's it. That's the end.
Lock in.
And you're locked in at that point, and people like that. A lot of people like that. So there are a lot of options. I do plan on using Milestone XP, and I'll tell you why. Because I don't got time. I did my time in the 3rd edition trenches. Right? I did my time with spreadsheets where I'm like, okay, this character is crazy if you've never played 3rd edition. Craig is 3rd level and Dave is 4th level. That means Craig got more XP for these ghouls, even though they're both in the same, but he was lower level than Dave. So that means he was fighting tougher ghouls. So you had to do all this math. And for, I don't know, man, like 5 or 8 years or however long that game lasted, I did that every week, didn't even think about it. It was awful. It was literally like we had to bust out we had to crowdsource it. The players had to all help, and we all had our calculators out and stuff like that. But we took it for granted. We didn't even consider it. And I am like, I'm too old for that now.
It made tax season so much easier.
All of that is about buy-in at the beginning of the campaign, because if you don't have that conversation, to go with your metaphor from before, that you end up with a group where Frodo wants Milestone XP for throwing the ring into Mount Doom. Sam wants XP for expressing his character's beliefs about Frodo, and Boromir wants to know how much XP Sauron is worth. Right?
Boromir legit want that.
Yeah, but you can have that conversation at the beginning to be like, these are the things that you will be rewarded for in play. Yeah. Is everybody okay with that? And if Boromir is like, no, I want XP for every goddamn orc I kill, either Boromir needs to get on board, or you can be like, cool, Boromir, you get shot to death. Thanks for playing.
That's
Boromir, you're on board. Right?
Yeah, Tolkien talks about that session in the making of the. I think that there's fewer things that we can do as dungeon masters to make our lives happier and make our players happier than set expectations at the beginning. And if you tell your players what you're up to ahead of time, hey, I got this crazy idea, they will get excited that you respected them enough to bring them into the process, and they will play along with your crazy ideas, even if it's not the thing that they were hoping for initially.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Mike, hearing all this and kind of, I would maybe it's too much in saying this, but with the rise of kind of Milestone XP, thanks to streaming, is it something that you guys will weigh heavily in the next book or next update, et cetera, where you put it right next to kind of Combat XP, or will Combat XP kind of always be the main focus for the rule book, as it were?
It is a really interesting question, and I would not be surprised if, like, in a theoretical 6th edition or even in some update, that the sort of quest XP, like, hey, if you rescue this guy, like, you can imagine from the starter set, there's the adventure where it begins. You're heading to town, and this guy gets kidnapped. You have to go rescue him. If the adventure just said, it might even say this, I can't remember, I haven't looked at it in a while. Like, okay, if the players rescue the guy and escape the caves, they are now 2nd level. Like, just that straightforward. Yeah. But, it's funny hearing all this. I'm kind of like have this like contrarian note rising in me. Like, my next campaign, what I want to run, I had this entire thing now figured out. I want to run a campaign where it's like, okay, every week you guys get like 2 to 4 hours to play, and every week the dungeon levels up. So if you guys don't get enough stuff done to level up your characters, you're just hosed. You're going to fall behind.
I love it.
Oh, that's every game. That's every game I've ever run.
Yeah, and just do that, right?
Every game I run is the clock is always ticking, and if the players don't proactively try to stop the bad guys, that means those bad guys are leveling up and getting better.
Yeah, so I love that as a table-focused thing. Like, I think people love Darkest Dungeon. They love Torchbearer.
Oh yeah,
Dungeon. Yeah, there are games that are like, be good or die. Right. And it goes back to what we were talking before about player skill. Like, you get better at clearing the dungeon faster, getting further on any given session, pushing 1 or 2 more rooms before you go back to town. But speaking from experience, I don't know that for us, like, that doesn't work for a stream.
No, I don't think it would. Yeah.
Yeah. Because
it'd be
audience,
fun once. And then it's like,
exactly.
All right, let's do it again next week. Fuck
the
you,
audience starts to suffer. Yeah. The audience starts to suffer when they fail, because I think that people want that to be the consequence. They want it to be brutal. They want it to be like, if you die, you die, and everything is gritty and horrible. But they forget that, like, cool, all right, well, you're going to be first level 6 or 7 times while you learn this. And you're like, oh, this room again, more kobolds? And it's like, okay, but that's the structure of play. So I think it can be really, really fun, for sure, the idea of like fronts or clocks advancing as you play. But if you're trying to make it an art form to be consumed by non-players, you have to be very careful about how to pace that.
Yeah.
Because people will get tired.
I will say that in reference to the earlier stuff about the difference between the player who wants XP for monsters and the player who wants to throw the ring in the Mount Doom, I think you can make Boromir happy if at the end of that session you say, okay, you guys killed all the goblins, so you get this extra quest XP. Right, and that way he feels like, oh, great. Does he really need to keep track of every individual goblin? I bet not. I bet he would be happy with that little, like, you didn't let any goblins get away, so you get a bonus here.
Yeah, the solution we found to that problem in Court of Swords was turning milestones over to the players. So the players come up with goals for their character. They say, I want to kill all the goblins. I want to steal the ring from Frodo, and I want to go back to my home a hero, right? And the GM assigns, like, I will assign a value to those. Be like, all right, so killing all the goblins is probably a medium goal. Stealing the ring from Frodo is going to be hard, and ever returning home at all is going to be deadly. But if you pull it off, you get a bunch of experience. Instead of the GM obscuring or obfuscating those goals and being like, oh, you did a goal, check. You just turn it over to the players, and the players will tell you what they want to do, so that
cool.
in the next session you can. Yeah, in the next session, I can build. I can say, like, if JP's character wants to learn about a certain NPC, I know that's a flag that JP is waving, saying, please include this NPC more so that I can interact with them.
That's interesting because I put a big document in front of my players. I think it's online somewhere, and said, hey, these are the campaigns I'm interested in running next. What do you guys want to play? And they picked the Black Company game. They picked the Mercenary Company game, and I told them explicitly, the hook, in order to enjoy this, you're going to have to buy into the idea that you care about fulfilling the contract. In those days, the Black Company was in service too, right? And that notion that we do what we say we will do no matter what. Our team literally signs a contract to do that. Well, there's your milestone stuff. Okay, guys, if you complete this, you're going to get this feat. You're going to get this, that, and the other thing. You're going to get these mechanical and narrative rewards, and tie it all into the characters and the team and the decisions they make in players, because then when they look at a given contract, they're going to be like, there are good rewards here, but we're all going to die. Right. And that's a great narrative, a great player choice, dramatic player agency, all that good stuff.
Yeah. For sure. The final topic, and we won't spend too much time on this, but the idea of, skill is a game fluidity element. That is, to expand on that, better players are just going to play faster, and it's more fun to watch because they're not fumbling on their rules. And I think we've experienced this on Court of Swords. Matt, you're kind of going through this right now with everyone playing new characters for the first time and seeing how those skills work. Does it behoove someone who's going to stream their game to know their character inside and out, or is it better to learn alongside with the audience so that the audience also knows what's available? Like, where do you guys sit on that?
I personally feel it depends on the type of audience you're trying to draw in. Because, I mean, most of my players, the last campaign was their first time playing a role-playing game ever. And we mess up rules all the time.
Sure.
You know, as much as, you know, Keyleth got shit for, you know, not keeping track of all the druid spells and all druid forms at all times, Grog, who was a barbarian, forgot his extra rage damage often. You know, like, it sometimes happens when you're caught up in the moment that you forget things. And some people would complain and be frustrated and angry that we were suboptimal players. But we got a larger response, people saying it made me feel better to know that even on this level, you can make mistakes and it's okay, or I've done that too. And it helped, and acknowledging that we were forgetting things or that we were making mistakes helped them remember those rules for their own game better. So I don't know, it can depend. If you really want to draw a really hardcore audience that loves watching optimal, tactical, everyone's great player gameplay, then that could be a very important focus for you. For our particular stream and our game, we're more narrative focused. We're more, we don't want to spend too much time reading through a rule book to remember exactly how something works. And if it's taking a while, we'll just make a snap decision based on what makes sense in the moment and move forward.
Right.
So I think it really depends on the type of audience you're trying to draw in, what type of viewer you're trying to appease, and what kind of thing is fun for your players. You know, if your players really enjoy being super tactical, then definitely cater to that. But if they're more interested in character dynamics and being silly and getting in bar fights and lighting things on fire, then maybe it's not something you need to focus on too much.
Right. Koebel, you were shaking your head as I said the question. Where do you fall on that?
I mean, I'm on the record as saying it is, and I believe this very strongly. And of course, because I believe it very strongly, I immediately start thinking of exceptions. It is the player's job to know their shit.
Sure.
Yep.
There is no virtue in ignorance. However,
Yeah.
people are people, and there is definitely a virtue in presenting the game as being a thing that human beings do, and human beings screw up all the time. And in fact, I said this about Matt. I was on the record. I went on the Critical Role subreddit, and I was like, listen, y'all, because people were giving Matt, I don't even remember what it was about, but I was like, I watched that whole thing happen live, and I don't think anything Matt did was a mistake, because not forgetting a rule is not a mistake. The only mistake is if Matt thinks, oh, I knew how that worked and I screwed it up. That's a mistake, and only Matt knows. Forgetting a rule is just a thing that happens. Misinterpreting something is it's the game is too complex for any. I was one of the designers on the Dune collectible card game. It was impossible to hold that entire game in your head at once. Period. No one could do it. Right. So you were always going to have to be looking up the rules and misinterpreting things. That is a human thing to do. So the notion that maybe it's okay, which is just a hypothetical, I realize that. The notion that maybe it's a good thing for players to be kind of tabula rasa and figure things out as they go, because then the audience is learning with them. I think it's the player's job to know their shit. And it's just respect for the other players. It's your turn. What are you going to do? I'm going to cast the spell. Okay, do you know what that spell does? No. What? Right? That is disrespecting the other people at the table. But at the same token, happens all the time, isn't really anything you can do about it other than just be mindful. That's all. Sure. Mindfulness and having empathy with the players and realizing nobody's perfect, and thank God.
I think it should be stated that the only people that can be somewhat upset, might be a harsh word, but upset that the player doesn't remember their stuff is the people at the table. People watching it, don't fucking hound that person for not knowing their shit. That's the worst thing in the world. It's really bad.
Yeah, if you want something that doesn't have moments like that, go watch all of Netflix.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah,
but if what you want is you want to see people playing D&D, then that means what you want is you want to see people forgetting rules and misinterpreting things.
Yeah.
Because it is built into the nature of this is a really, really. I remember when Wizards of the Coast had incredibly ambitious plans for expanding the category, and there was going to be. And in fact, I think Mike will correct me. The most successful role-playing game in history is the Pokemon Junior Adventure game. They sold like 6 million units.
Fuck yeah, they did.
Like some right, and they had broken down. They had hired a psychologist, child psychologist, to understand at what age do kids understand the different levels of role-playing games, because we want to make a game for 6-year-olds. Well, okay, 6-year-olds don't understand character permanence, or they do understand character permanence, but they don't understand the polyhedrals. We'll make a game for them. But guess what? D&D is not the Pokemon Junior Adventure game. It's up at the other end of the chart. It is the most complex game for the oldest gamers. If that's what you want to watch, then you're watching a whole bunch of people sitting around failing to read the last sentence of the spell that explained everything and would have saved us from arguing for the last half hour.
I mean, I think there's a difference between, like, I absolutely agree that if you come to the table in the first session and you don't know how to play your character, it's everyone's responsibility to kind of like help you get there, right? And if 10 episodes later you're still forgetting the same rules, like fix your shit.
Yeah.
It's funny once, but like get it under control. You'll get to a point where no matter how much skill all the players have, D&D exists in the contextual intersection of rules. And that's where it gets complicated, because you'll stop having people feedback about you forgot the rule or you did it wrong, and more like you did it in a contextual way that I wouldn't have, or I interpret these things intersecting. And that's when people start screaming Crawford, right? Because they're like, we need rules as intended, not rules as written anymore. Yeah. And I think you'll never get out of that ever. Like that, there's no group that is past that place.
In fact, I have a third term that I use, and that's the rules as played. The thing that happens at the table. And to me, that's really the only thing that matters, is the thing that's happening at the table. And happily, I've cultivated a team of players that feel the same way. So we talk about what we think is reasonable. We don't talk about what we think Jeremy Crawford intended. And if we all agree on what makes sense, and if they perceive me as being primarily worried about what makes sense based on the sociological accumulation of decisions we've been making all the way, right? And that shared communal understanding of what we all tend to agree on makes sense and is fair, then all the players are happy. And that's what matters, is the rules as played, not necessarily the rules as written or even as intended.
I've gotten to a point where I don't care what the rules as intended were, because if you didn't write a rule that I can interpret, then get the fuck out of here.
And look, here's the thing. This is true of rules as
doesn't
intended.
Matter.
Completely agree. Rules as intended, rules as written. If you as a dungeon master screw up, guess what? You can't go get Jeremy Crawford or Mike Mearls and say, could you come to my table and explain how it's really your fault? No, it's on you. It's on you. So you better own it. You better own that stuff, and you better say out of the gate, it's my game, not Mike Mearls' game, right? Yeah. And because he's not there to defend the decisions that were made in design or that you made. You are, and so you might as well just say, listen, it's my game. We're going to work it out. Yeah. Together, as a group.
I will say also, carrying into the streaming element too, there is a very real anxiety that comes from knowing that every decision you make in the game is going to be picked apart by an audience.
Oh yeah, that's why I've never DM'd for that very reason.
And it's real for the players on all scales. And I've talked with many people in many different role-playing game streams too. You can make a mistake once and then get a deluge of people letting you know you made the mistake. That then gets in your head, so the next time you play, you're so worried about not making that mistake, you make another mistake. Yeah. And now that's two reasons the audience is coming on you. And it's just this mounting thing that even as you try to ignore it, it's still present. And so that's something we're trying to work through as we go forward too, because it's led to a lot of like negative feedback in some elements, and some players have been down on themselves about it. But it's just unfortunately part of the nature of putting something in public.
It sucks.
Is you have to know that's part of it.
When they're criticizing your friends, that's the thing that kills you.
No, I love it. You're like, when they're not giving me shit.
That's not true, Adam. That's not true. You're being funny. It kills you when they're criticizing your friends. I'll tell you this. I feel as though this is a ridiculous thing to say, but I feel as though there is a technological solution to this. I think if there was a low latency streaming service, if I could just turn to chat and go, hey, how does this work? Bloop. Oh yeah, right.
We do that sometimes.
Right? Yeah. If that were possible, instead of having to wait 14 seconds basically, right? 7 seconds to back. I would love the idea to crowdsource a lot of this stuff, because the crowd is wise. The people watching know the rules. If I could just literally say, how does this work? And just wait. It's
a living index. Exactly.
Great. Yeah. But you can't do that. You have to sit there and wait, and that's interminable.
Yeah. Well, from a streaming perspective, and from a stream where we have chat up and available, because it's all like we don't have a studio, we're doing it on our computers. Our chat knows that if we've messed up a rule or they have an alternate interpretation of a rule, they can give us a page number, because without a page number, I'm not even going to look at it. They can give us a page number, but they have to know that whatever they are trying to help us fix will not be applied now. It's not for today. This is like, just in case you never want to screw it up again, here's the actual rule. But for today, we're done. It's in the record.
Stone. Yeah.
Everyone's experience with this will be different. But my personal experience in wargaming is that coming to wargaming from role-playing, Like I was raised on role playing, and then got into wargaming in the 90s. I discovered that what we did at the table was unusual. We argued all the time about everything. And wargaming, all the people I was playing with was like, well, you think it works this way. I think it works this way. Let's roll a die and see. And that'll be what decides it. And we'll look it up after the game because, you know, we're at a game store. Time is precious. And there are all these pressures here at this tournament, here at this game convention. And I was like, this is crazy. These guys have this stuff work. That didn't mean people didn't argue about stuff. They did. But that notion of like, figure it out after this thing is this session. Let's just roll a die and see who believes what and move on. If there's not a judge nearby, I was like, wow, that's great. And so that became a big part of my DMing style. Was all like, look, I'm going to make this ruling now, but just be aware that I'm going to go look it up afterwards, and it may change. Or you know what, I'm going to err in favor of the player now because I don't know the answer and I don't have time to look it up, but I will figure it out afterwards. Just be aware that it may change.
Okay, it's so hard when you have to make a call that's not in favor of the player or the GM, but in favor of like what seems to be the most narratively interesting thing in the moment, right? Like there are moments where it's like, okay, well, you made this move and you rolled and you failed, and now your character is dead.
Yeah,
there is some debate about that because the stakes are so high. And then having to roll that back can be very deflating, right? Where you kind of want to lean into like, okay, the most interesting thing to have happen here is you died, so we're going to stick with that. And there's a stakes question there.
I seem to recall Mr. Mercer in the final battle with Vecna, someone did something and you went down a road and then they found out that's not how it worked. And you were like, I'm sorry, man. You should have remembered how your stuff worked. Do you remember that? Am I off base?
I don't remember the specific moment, but that's happened a few times. And like to a point when the stakes are super high. Like for instance, the first time they encountered Vecna, there was a disintegrate spell that was supposed to disintegrate a character, and I began describing like the moment of them like just turning to ash and dust.
This might be what I was remembering, yeah.
And they were like, "Oh wait, no, this actually would have circumvented it." And so I went, and that is the vision you had right before you suddenly shot to reality and dodged just in time. So
that's very clever. I also remember seeing you get really angry once at a player because of that, and I was like, I empathize with you so much right now because you were like, oh, you know.
Well, you describe something and then it's like, actually,
this happens all the time. The tension that you're trying to build as a group of people telling a story versus the game's mechanics occasionally butting in. I think it happens to everybody. We had a situation in Court of Swords where I described the during the short rest, one of the characters had a nap, and I was like, you wake from a dream of like your home city, drowning and everyone dying in this cataclysmic thing. And another player chimed in and was like, also everybody gets 16 hit points. And I was like, yes, okay, like that's true. Also, that happens, but like we were having a moment here. Like, so and that's the group. You have to build those things.
Yeah. I generally live by the rule that there's a very small kind of amorphous time window to retcon any events that have just taken place.
Yeah.
If they manage to catch me in a rules change, within a very short period of time, and I can narratively roll it back a bit and still like keep the story flowing, then I may allow it. If in the instance you're talking about, they all of a sudden remember something that would have changed it a minute and a half, 2 minutes ago, and we've already moved on to two different other player turns, then no, that was your responsibility to recall that, and we're moving forward with how it played out. I'm sorry.
I think the phrase my friends and I use is friendly game. Is this a friendly game? And the answer is, well, has anyone else gone and has anything else happened in the game that there's a die roll or a player choice? Because if all this happened is narrative repercussions, then we can rewind those. But the branching tree of how would this have happened? The flow chart, that we're not going to spend our time undoing people's actions and undoing
exactly.
Stuff like
that. Yeah. The final thing I want to ask, and this is purely for Mike. I will ask the other three of you how you use it, but what the fuck is inspiration for?
Yes, Mike.
Seriously, Mike.
Tell us, Mike. What is inspiration for?
And I say that with the most love possible, but
it's one of those things where it's exactly like we were trying to kind of like mess with how people play the game, and it's why we even say in the DMG like, oh, you don't have to use this if you don't want to.
Right.
But it is like the single most. Well, here's the thing. I think we put it in because we thought, okay, we have these tables for your background, your bond, your trait, your flaw, and here's the thing you get for using those. And I think what we've generally seen is people use them without needing the mechanical
That's true. They
reward.
That's true.
That they generally like, oh, cool, my character is being hunted by bounty hunters and I betrayed this person, and okay, that's cool. Like I just want to play that. Like that, having that as unique character is its own reward. I don't then need inspiration to get me to keep actually doing that. Because in a way, it's probably kind of runs counter to a lot of our design where we're like, hey, we want to really think of the audience this game is building. We probably don't want an audience where people have to be like, hey, to like portray a fun character, you need to really keep getting mechanical rewards. Like I get why you'd want to do that, but I think for D&D, we didn't really need to do that. Yeah. So I think most groups just, they read it, they just forget to use it.
I don't think I've ever seen in all the D&D I've played / watched, I've never seen a player say, hey, can I get inspiration for that?
Yeah. Because it takes you out of the
I think I have once or twice. Yeah. The point stands. Yeah.
I've had it happen, but usually it's just to give me shit.
I'll tell you that, I mean, I believe mechanically in the idea of inspiration. I believe in the idea of rewarding the players for doing things that are in character. The problem, and I don't know if I speak for everybody, but the problem I have is I have no idea what the hell's going on with your background, man. Like I got 6 players. I got 6 players, and that's 3 different. There's a bond and a flaw and that kind of stuff. And what I've noticed,
got time for that shit.
I mean, it makes me feel. It often makes me feel like if I were a better dungeon master, I would know those things. But you can only beat yourself up over that so much before you got to move on. But what I discovered in prepping for the next game was, and this is probably unique to my game, is that. I don't want this to sound like a plug for the next game. I apologize. The players, because they're members of a mercenary company, they have ranks or job titles. Like there's a standard bearer, and they're gonna get, and there's more of those than there are players. And so there's going to be some left over, and the players are going to choose, and I'm going to know which ones they choose, and I design mechanics for them. And so if it's sort of like I'm complicit in their backstory. So I'm going to know you're the standard bearer if you do something that is part of that kind of title and is in line with your character. Here's inspiration. And it's not going to be so much about me remembering these somewhat obscure decisions you made 6 months ago. Yeah. It's going to be a big part of your character.
Yeah, when we first started streaming the game, we moved over to 5th edition from Pathfinder. Inspiration was something we were trying to incorporate because it was we just learned the rules and it was in the rule book. We're like, cool. And the first few episodes you watch, occasionally people get inspiration, but we also confused it with bardic inspiration, which one of our characters was a bard. And so instead of being an advantage, we made it like a d6 you had to roll. And then it just got to the point where it was like, well, I feel like the bard should be the one who's giving inspiration. And I found that to still reward those moments of character intrigue, instead of just giving them inspiration, I would adjust DCs on certain challenges that were in front of them. And if they succeeded or they were being really cool about a moment, I would lower the DC in my head for what they wanted to accomplish. Or if they really messed up, I'd raise the DC. And so, yeah, it was a cool idea that narratively for the way we were playing, even when we tried to utilize it, eventually it just like a vestigial twin and just kind of fell off. It didn't find necessity in our game and went away.
I think that's pretty common.
Yeah. If you want to do a little gaming archaeology on 5th, you can tell the mechanics we weren't sure about by the number of other mechanics that lean on them. So there are very few, if any, things that use hit dice because we weren't really sure at the end of the day would hit dice be something people really want to use. Well, and that might be something where we would delve more into. Inspiration is another good example of there is nothing in the game that requires you to use it. Like you can just totally forget to use it, and everything else functions fine.
Yeah.
I find the trouble with inspiration is that I just want to give it out all the time because as written, I'm like, you open your mouth. Good fucking job. Like, is there a group?
You did something. You did anything. Thank God.
You did literally anything. Like you talked in your character's voice, or you did a thing that is above just like being yourself, pretending to be the character. I wonder if there are groups where people need that. Like, I don't know, what do I do? And you're like, you'll get inspiration if you talk in a funny voice, or like. It's never been a problem of not knowing when to give it out. It's just being like, I guess everybody have inspiration. Have it again. Oh, you already have it. Have another one. Like you can't.
I see it as a useful carrot for groups that want to engage or are more mechanically focused and more tactical, combat centric players, and you want to get them more invested in the story and their characters, role playing elements. It is a carrot you can dangle to give them the option to do so, and I see that can be important with some groups.
Yeah, it's definitely something.
But in a theoretical space.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say that as a person who likes to win at Dungeons and Dragons, I like to get XP, I like to beat encounters, I like to be challenged by the DM and do the thing. Every time I get into that situation, I'm like, cool, well, before I make this roll, how do I get inspiration, right? How can I charge up and then dive into that thing? Because if I go into an important roll without inspiration, I fucked up. And the way to get inspiration is to just do a little thing where I'm in character. And for me, that's like, it's tough because then it becomes looking at the GM like, was that enough? You want more? You want me to do some more fucking Shakespearean horse shit? All right, here we go.
There's always more.
Like, what else do you need? You want another monologue? I got it. I'm not trying to open this door.
Guide to Shakespearean horseshit.
Yeah, I'm not trying to open the door till you give me that inspiration. So
I think it's tricky because definitely you don't want to. I mean, this is on a group-by-group basis, but you don't want to imply that there is a virtue to speaking in character or a virtue to role-playing, because then the players that aren't interested in that feel like, wait, why is that? And I've seen that happen in my game, although that was probably when we were younger, is that players who were rewarded by the DM for role-playing, there was definitely the players who just weren't interested in talking in character and doing that kind of stuff, but were still having fun and still contributing. Yeah. They got resentful. And one of the things I felt like I learned as I did this was, again, players are there for different reasons. And so in general, I think that inspiration can work. It's rewarding people for doing something cool as opposed to punishing them for not doing it, right? Which is always good design. But yeah, I think be careful that you're not ending up like just always showering those one or two players with inspiration because they're playing the way you wished everybody played. But but that's not. It should be okay to people play differently.
The fundamental problem with it is that it's supremely fiat based. It's like, did you amuse the GM for a second?
Yeah, it's like,
and if
what's
so,
that
here you go.
Card game? Cards Against Humanity. Yeah, it's like yes, I like you most, so here you win.
Yeah. So it's very tough. There are systems that I think allow for rewarding players playing their characters in a meaningful way. I think there are definitely reward systems that plug in a way, but I've always felt like what Matt was saying, that it feels vestigial. It's like, well, you're all role playing all the time, so everybody just has advantage all the time.
You made a funny joke. Here you go. Have some inspiration.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like dog treats. Like, good job, boy. Good job. You did it. Funny joke. RP. Here you go, buddy.
Yeah.
It just feels weird. Yeah.
Jesus. Well, last time we did this was October, and you guys were just getting ready to release Xanathar, Mike, and now we're here in February, and you guys are getting ready to release another book. Is that, first off, what's the new book? And then I want to ask, is that the normal schedule of releasing things?
So the book is Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. It's a book. It's a combination. It's a bit like Bolo's Guide to Monsters, in that it's a combination of a bestiary, so lots of new creatures, mainly creatures above CR10. So really going for more powerful creatures. Okay. So I think it's half the creatures are above challenge 10 and half are below. And then the front half of the book goes into the lore of things like the Blood War, the war between the elves and the drow, the sort of like cosmic conflicts of D&D, and Mordenkainen's notes on them. So Mordenkainen's basic shtick is he believes that every big conflict has to be held in careful balance, so that no one powerful group overruns the cosmos of D&D. And so now, as far as whether this is our regular schedule, we're kind of committed to being. No, it is actually. It's a bit of a change. Usually, this time of year, we're doing an adventure. But I think one of the things we want to do is we don't want to become completely chaotic, but we also don't want to become too predictable. We do. Yeah, we want to keep people on not. It's a fine line to walk, but we want to be always surprising, but not so surprising that it doesn't make sense. So I wouldn't be surprised if you see that we just mess around with our schedule some more. Gamers especially, because gamers are definitely pattern-forming creatures. They want to find the template and then apply it. And we are very much not adherents of templates. I am myself... People at work tell me I'm very chaotic, so I guess that's just what, and I'm just owning it. That's just what I am. So so I would not try to think that just because we did something one year that's the correct plan for the next year. Okay. We're always evolving. So we'll see what we do next year. It should be interesting. So
that sounds smart. Reacting to what people are doing. Yeah,
totally.
That's a lot of it too. Yeah.
I'm gonna pry there. If you had your way, tomorrow you can make a new book appear out of thin air. What's in it? I got to pry.
Wow.
You don't have to answer that, Mike.
Yeah, you don't have to answer that.
Yeah. As your lawyer, you don't have to answer that.
No, I know exactly what I'd want, because I've been messing around with this myself. I would just really, I don't know if you remember the 4th edition book, Dungeon Delve.
Oh, I love that. God.
I would love to do that book for 5th. It basically
keep in mind, there's nothing in that book that a third party couldn't do and put it on the DM's Guild.
Exactly.
But That would be, I love that book. That book is so useful. I also like the book of challenges from 3rd edition.
Yeah, that was another similar thing.
Yeah.
But if you haven't seen those books, basically Dungeon Delve had 20 short adventures in it. They're all just quick little dungeons you could run in an evening. And what was great about it was, and I did this a ton of times during the 4th edition era, we would just, hey, there's 5 of us here, let's play some D&D. So just get on the character builder, make 5th level characters, and the DM would pull out the 5th level delve, and we would just play.
There was one for each level. That was the thing. No matter what level you were at, or what level you wanted to play at tonight, 12th level, that's fine. There's a 12th level dungeon delve.
Nice.
It was great. Yeah, so you heard it here first. The next expansion officially.
Good answer, Mike. Go ahead and mark inspiration for that, man. Good answer.
I get advantage
arbitrarily. It's worth nothing.
Yeah, exactly. Last question for everyone here. What do you guys want Wizards to make for their next book? What would you guys want to expand? Be it
take notes here.
Monster manual, be it items, be it player advancement, be it how to stream D&D, whatever you want. What would that answer be?
I just want to be surprised. Like I don't want to be able to predict. Like that's the thing for me. Like I've been playing D&D for 25 years now, and I have seen lots of D&D supplements come and go. I've made a dungeon crawl role-playing game. I would way rather that the professionals at Wizards of the Coast released a book and I was like, I would not have expected that. Instead of like a thing that I'm like, yeah, good. I'm glad that's because anything that I want badly enough to expect someone else to design, I should stop being lazy and design it myself. So instead, I would like to be Steve Jobs and be like, you didn't know you want this. You want this now. And be like, You know what? You're right. I do want that.
All right. So make an iPhone, Mike. Get on that.
Yeah.
Totally do it. It's fine. Hire Joni Ives. It'll be fine. He's cheap. He's not doing anything right now. Yeah. It's fine.
Mercer, Koebel, you guys got an answer?
Oh, man. I mean, just for personal preference, I would love to see some other settings that open up, classic settings be revisited. I love Forgotten Realms, don't get me wrong, and I'm a huge fan of what you guys have done with it. But I mean, I adore Planescape. I want to see more plane interaction, overlapping. I want to see Sigil. I want to see, and even when Perkins brought it into the recent game, I'm like, oh, yes, more of that, please. So that made me excited. So more other settings, Dark Sun, things that the show players that not every D&D world has to be Forgotten Realms. Because for a lot of people that are coming into the game now and are watching all the streams that you guys are doing on there, for the most part, a lot of it is just Forgotten Realms. And that's really cool. And I know it's like trying to keep it core. It's a good way to introduce them to that. But I think it'd also be a cool time to start showing people that there are many different ways that you can build a world around this system that have very vastly different thematic elements and high magic, low magic. I'd like to see some more of that.
It's the coolest thing. I agree completely. Like I love all of those kind of like weird settings, but I'm having a super strange experience running Tomb where like I grew up on the very pulpy like R.A. Salvatore, Drizzt. Like I know I've gone back and tried to read it now and not enjoyed it as much as I did when I was 9. But playing Tomb of Annihilation.
That's okay.
Playing Tomb of Annihilation and be like, it's Artist Simber. I'm so excited. Like being able to tap back into that like preteen excitement about a setting that feels so like visceral and real to me has been very strange because I'm a super cynical dude. And I'm just like, Forgotten Realms, that's for dorks. But I'm loving it so much.
He just called you a dork, Matt.
And it's super cool to think that other people will have that experience as their settings might be like revived. I was happy to see 4th edition was doing Dark Sun. I know other people were.
I played, my friend Jordy ran a Dark Sun game, and I got to play a Defiler Warlock, and it was one of my favorite characters of all time. Love Dark Sun.
Nice.
Yeah.
Koebel,
I covered Dark Sun stream.
We need an answer, but you can't say strongholds and followers.
No. I did the Adam Koebel thing. I'm making the book that I wish. That's the beauty of the OGL. Okay, so I've got kind of a stock answer that I use when people have asked me this, and I don't want to cheat and give people something they've heard before, so I'm going to give 2 answers. One is the stock answer is I would like to see Wizard of the Coast. Mike, cover your ears. I think they've done a bad job with leveraging the power of their adventures, although it may just be that I don't know the adventures well enough. I've bought all of them and read all of them, but haven't run any of them yet, so I could be wrong. But I would like to see, for instance, the Big City campaign. Here it's Waterdeep, the source book for Waterdeep, and it's also the campaign that shows you how D&D can be an exclusively urban game. right? Okay, great. That's that adventure. That's 2018. 2019 is the hex crawl game.
Oh, dude,
right?
Tomb is that. You have to play
is
it.
it?
Tomb is so good, and it brings back all of that.
That's
like
good.
hex by hex. Is it raining today? That matters. Like navigating rations,
That
all that
explains some
horseshit
of the
is
things
back.
I read. That makes me happy. But
Yeah,
that's
it's so good.
you understand the principle though, right? Is
Yeah.
that like each adventure should be showing people that D&D and Tomb really does do that. That D&D can be very different than the things we've seen before. So that's one answer. But the other answer is I really, really like the Draconomicon, right? And that was a great example of like anybody could have made this book. There was nothing in the Draconomicon that a third-party company couldn't have done, but nobody would have done it as well as Wizards of the Coast did. It doesn't have to be the Draconomicon, but something like that where you pick this hallmark of D&D, dragons, and you just do a whole book on them and get new player options and new dungeon master options, and it seems really boutique. Right, it seems ultra specific, but the game it's got dragons in the name of the game, right? So like doing a whole book just on dragons is something that I think a lot of people would like to see. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't have to be dragons, but that the quality of design and writing and production that book I was a big fan of. So something like that.
All right, Mike, you got it all. You got all that.
Got it all written down. I got my
Okay,
iPad right
all
here.
right.
I'm just like, you got my notes.
Yeah,
up.
let us know. We've got 2018, 2019 planned for you. Let us know when you get to 2020. We'll
Nice, you got it.
All right, that's going to do it for the show. We went a little bit over time, so I appreciate everyone allowing us to do that here on the panel. Let's do some shout-outs, though, to wrap everything up. Adam, why don't we start with you, and then the others can lead by example here.
Sure. Yeah, sounds good. So I'm Adam Koebel. You can find me on Twitch, twitch.tv/Adam Koebel, or on Twitter at Skinny Ghost. As JP mentioned at the top of the show, I am the co-creator of award-winning tabletop role-playing game Dungeon World, and you can find me running role-playing games right here on itmeJP and over at twitch.tv/Roll20app, where I'm currently running through Tomb of Annihilation, and I didn't know I was going to love it. I thought I was going to hate it, but it's really, really fun. So if you want to see a hex crawl and like the King of Kickstarter was saying, definitely check that out. All my schedule stuff can be found over on Twitter. So awesome. That's me.
What were we going to ask, Colville?
Me? I don't remember.
Oh, okay, good. Great. Why don't you do some shout outs instead then?
I'm not good at that. I'm not important.
www.kickstarter.com.
I ran a big the Kickstarter. The thing is, the Kickstarter is doing fine. It's doing okay. It doesn't need to be. We're going to do all the things we said we're going to set out to do. How about go to Comixology and check out the Critical Role comic, because that is something I am intensely proud of. It's something that is some of my favorite writing that I've ever done, and it's something that I collaborated with Mr. Mercer on. So it's just a blast. We got 2 issues to go, and people accused me of Scanlan being my favorite character, but I gave Grog the most epic moment in the whole comic. So stay tuned.
Nice. Some teasers. I like it. Mr. Mercer, some shout outs.
You can find me Thursdays at 7 p.m. Pacific on Geek and Cindery's Twitch, dungeon mastering for our show Critical Role. Check out the comic that our amazing Adam Koebel has been writing. It's been a lot of fun to work on that. I think that's about it. I'm bad at this too.
What game this week are you voice acting in? What new game?
Oh, if you're playing,
that's a good question.
If you've been playing Monster Hunter World, you can hear me then as the field team leader and the huntsman. Nice. So you'll be really annoyed with me partway through the game. I apologize.
Nice. And last but not least, Mike Mearls, do some shout outs, please.
All right. So you can find me. I'm on Twitter at Mike Mearls, just both words squished together. And I have the Mike Mearls Happy Fun Hour, 1 p.m. Pacific at twitch.tv/DND. They gave me my own little show, so I spend an hour a week building a new subclass for the different classes in D&D. And so that's where we're starting. Maybe we'll eventually get to monsters and magic items and spells. But
a lot of folks on my subreddit have watched that, and they speak very highly of it. So I encourage people to check it out.
Yeah, awesome. It's also, I will say go watch it. It's great.
What time is it on? One more time, just so everyone hears it after that.
It is Tuesdays, 1 p.m. Pacific time.
Pacific. Okay. That's 4 Eastern, I think.
Yep.
Never math on stream. That's rule number 1 of doing RPGs. Just don't math on stream. That's going to do it, though, for this roundtable. Thanks, everyone, so much for watching. Thank you, guys, for joining us here on this Sunday afternoon/evening. And we will see you guys potentially next time. We're out.
Yeah.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.